Yep.
Recording started.
Yeah.
We are live. Chris, what right now is going on in the world of the NCAA?
Well, right now there's a lot going on in the NCAA, and a lot of the big storyline has to be the Cinderellas in college basketball. I will get to some MLS news in a bit, but college basketball, Cinderellas reign supreme today. For the first time in 5 years, we saw a 16 seed defeat a 1 seed. And I remember back in 2018, there were a few tournament games in Pittsburgh where I got to see Trae Young. Duke played, so I got to see the Marvin Bagley III. I got to see a lot of players in that draft. But the draft that your friend told you about in Florida, can't remember his name at the top of my head, but you had a friend on the Draft Evolution podcast. It may have been DJ, but I remember back in the day, we were talking about some of the guys in that draft on your channel, the Evolution Network, DJ and myself. But this year is a little bit different, I think, because the two Cinderellas this year are Fairleigh Dickinson, a 16 seed. There were the UMBC Retrievers who beat Virginia back in 2018 as the 63rd seed. UMBC was ranked 63rd out of 68 teams, and they beat the number 1 overall seed Virginia, but Virginia's best player, DeAndre Hunter, suffered a season-ending injury in the ACC tournament. So Virginia was one and done. On the other hand, Fairleigh Dickinson didn't even win their conference tournament. Merrimack won their conference, but Merrimack was transitioning from Division II to Division I, so they were ineligible for the tournament. They won their conference tournament, but because they were transitioning from Division II to Division I, they were ineligible for the NCAA tournament. So guess what? Fairleigh Dickinson takes Merrimack's place. They have to win a play-in game to earn the right to play Purdue. They win the play-in game, and they beat Purdue. They were ranked 68th out of 68 teams, single worst team in the tournament, and they ended up playing the number 4, the weakest 1 seed, because Purdue was the last 1 seed. Alabama, Houston, and Kansas were the top 3 1 seeds based on region and ranking entering the tournament. And Purdue was considered the weakest 1 seed, but Fairleigh Dickinson knocked them out. And the number 68 out of 68 team, according to the experts, lives to play another day. And there was another Cinderella team, Princeton, too, but I want to focus on Fairleigh Dickinson because Purdue had numerous opportunities to win this game, Joey. They were 2 for 11 on 3-point shots in the first half. They came back, took a 6-point lead, and it looked like Purdue was going to put this away, but then Fairleigh Dickinson makes a mid-range shot and gets fouled on the play, cuts the 6-point deficit to 3. They go on a run. They gain the lead, and Purdue has the James Naismith player on their basketball team. They have a junior on their basketball team, Zach Edey, and Zach Edey is actually a second-round pick in this year's NBA draft if he declares, but he's a junior, and he's averaging over 20 points a game. He's 7 foot like Victor Wembanyama, but you can get him in the second round of the draft. And I told you, Joey, this NBA draft class, there were only 2 first-round players averaging 20 points a game. There's a third player in this NBA draft on Purdue that averages 20 points a game. He's the front runner to win the James Naismith Award, and if he declares, he'll be a second-round pick, not a first-round pick. So how often can you say that you would get the James Naismith Award winner in the second round of an NBA draft? But that's not the point. Edey stepped up, but the rest of Purdue's guards looked abysmal, and Purdue's guards had no identity without Jaden Ivey. 2 for 11 from 3-point shots in the first half. And I'll pull up the stats here for the box score. I want to see the final total for Fairleigh Dickinson versus Purdue. Like, I want to see the final 3-point percentages for both teams because it was pretty brutal for Purdue. I mean, this was a 1 seed, and to make matters worse for Purdue, this is their 3rd year in a row losing to a double-digit seed, Joey. I watched the game live, and then I rewatched the game on TNT in like 3 a.m. in the morning. So I'm telling you, Purdue, for a team that went 6 for 10 in the Big Ten championship, winning the Big Ten title game, This team looked incredibly sloppy in the first half, trailed Fairleigh Dickinson, came out, made some adjustments, but that just didn't quite go Purdue. The game just didn't quite go Purdue's way. So, I mean, Purdue was 5 for 26 from 3-point distance. I mean, they were 6 for 10 from 3-point range in the Big Ten championship, shooting situationally. But instead of shooting 10 3-pointers, keeping the game plan simple, keep it simple, stupid, what you've taught me over the years, they were like, nah, this is a 16 seed. We can shoot 3-pointers at will, and we're guaranteed to win this game. And what happened is they lost. They were 5 for 26 from 3-point range. And while Edey kicked ass, the rest of Purdue was incredibly sloppy. And Zach Edey, 21 points, 15 rebounds. And Edey, my friend thinks Edey's a top 10 pick in the NBA draft, but he's projected as a second rounder. And this is Purdue's third year in a row losing in the first round of the tournament to a double-digit seed, I might add. So that's extremely problematic. I mean, Purdue's got a serious drought.
Well,
we got to give credit to Fairleigh Dickinson, too.
Yeah, but this is something that I've been harping on basketball players of this generation on for years. Years.
I mean, you get the James Naismith Award winner in the second round of the draft, which is that right? Does the James Naismith Award winner deserve to fall to the second round of the draft in a draft where there's only 3 guys who average 20 points a game?
To answer your question, no. But I'm going to tell you why Purdue lost. They are falling into this trap of LeBron James used his man God physical body to shoot over 50% inside 3 feet. Yeah, but he only shot like 30% outside of it until like 3 years ago. Oh, Steph Curry shoots from 25 feet and makes it all the time. Well, yeah, but that's an anomaly. Okay. What about that other 20 feet in between? And that's what basketball players in this generation face. That 20 feet, they're doing well. They're doing well. 20 feet in there, they're failing. If Purdue would have shot well from that 20 feet that they failed, they would win this game. It's another example of how today's basketball players are failing. You cannot fail.
And I'm trying to figure out whose idea was it to make this adjustment, Joey, because you only shot 10 3-pointers in the Big Ten championship and won. And conversely, you do the opposite in the tournament. You shoot 26 3-pointers and you only make 5 of them. And you lose as a result. And look, Fairleigh Dickinson.
That's what I say. The mid-range game, because everybody says, well, the mid-range game doesn't matter. Here's a stat for you, kids. Mr. Maravich holds every conceivable, to this day, every conceivable scoring record in NCAA history. Averaging 24 points a game. He didn't have a 3-point line, kids. No 3-point line. Have a 3-point line, okay?
Yeah.
24 points a game. So every conceivable record.
I mean, here's what's even more impressive about Fairleigh Dickinson.
And was able to get the basket.
They went to Columbus, Ohio, Big Ten country, and they beat Purdue in Big Ten country. It's not just that. Fairleigh Dickinson had the shortest team in the entire tournament. The average height of their starters was 6'1", shortest in the entire tournament, and their tallest player is 6'6". Fairleigh Dickinson's tallest player is 6'6". Purdue is a 7-foot center, so and Fairleigh Dickinson's tallest player got into foul trouble in this game. Believe it or not, their leading scorer was held to 7 points through the first half. Through the first 27 minutes, Fairleigh Dickinson, leading scorer on the season, who averaged 17 points, got held to 7 points by Purdue's defense. But the offense for Purdue couldn't step up, and they kept letting Fairleigh Dickinson hang in the game. And that resulted in Fairleigh Dickinson being able to pull off this monumental upset win. And there's only 3 players in the NBA draft that average over 20 points a game. They're all big men. Victor Wembanyama, who plays in France, Chris Murray, Iowa lost to Auburn in the tournament, Joey, and Zach Edey of Purdue, who's a second-round pick and the front-runner to win the James Naismith Award. And he's out of the tournament too. So none of the 20-point scorers in this year's NBA draft are left in the March Madness tournament, which is creating a ton of parity. There are 0 perfect brackets, I might add.
And this is why I say you've got to be able to shoot mid-range. Because, oh, look at that. You only shoot 10 threes and you win. Shoot 25 and you lose. Could that be exactly what I've been saying for years? Okay?
Yep.
And so that Naismith Award winner, like I said, the Naismith Award winner for 3 years, the last 3 or 5 years, should go in the top 10. Best player in college basketball. And you're saying he's not better than 31 or 32 other players that are in this draft?
Zach Edey is listed as a mid-second round pick in the NBA draft, Joey. But here's the thing with Zach Edey. He's actually the tallest player in the entire draft class. It's 7'4", 295. Victor Wembanyama, the projected number 1 pick, is 7'2", 225 pounds, or 7'2", 250. 7'2", 250 is excellent for a center, especially a center that shoots like Steph Curry. We're not taking anything away from Wembanyama, but the biggest player in the draft is Zach Edey at 7'4", 295. He is the tallest player, and he weighs the most of any prospect in the draft class. And he's going to win the James Naismith Award. He's listed as a second-round pick because I think he's 20 or 21 already. I mean, that's the thing. He could come back for his senior year, and if he wins the James Naismith Award again, I would imagine he would go in the top 10 despite being a senior. Okay, he's 20. He's 20 years old.
Michael Jordan, Larry Bird, Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
This is why I don't like the idea of drafting for youth and longevity. And I'll get into that when I get into my MLS rant a little bit later, because the most successful player in the 2023 MLS draft is not one of the underclassmen. It's actually a senior, believe it or not. So I'm an outlier in the MLS this year. I know, right? Isn't that exciting? But before I get to that, let's talk about Princeton, because they were the other Cinderella team, and then I'll knock this MLS news out.
Well, I do want to say one thing about what you just said, and that, simply put, is this. The NBA's biggest mistake was letting people come out after 1 year. There's a reason other leagues still have a great crop of prospects, and the NBA is struggling compared to what they used to. Because they allowed children to try to be professional. That's why the
NHL draft might be 7 rounds, and the NHL draft might draft kids at the age of 18. But here's the point. They only let the first-round picks try out for the NHL team, and the rest of the kids either go to college or go back to junior hockey in Canada, or go to Sweden or Russia or Europe or whatever country they're in until they're 20. And then they come up to the AHL. If they can't make the NHL team, then they continue developing until their rookie contracts are up or until the NHL organization feels they're ready for the next level. I think that's one of the reasons why the NHL is more successful at developing players compared to the NBA. And you could make the same argument with baseball too, but like, as far as the NBA goes, and even MLS, you can argue, MLS has MLS Next now. So if you're a second-round pick, you don't necessarily have to make the immediate jump to the MLS. You can go to MLS Next in the minor leagues and develop until you're ready.
Because Chris, here's something that I have seen that the biggest thing, and I've talked about on this for a couple of years now, there is a rule in the NBA called palm, when you put your hand under the ball and put it over as you're dribbling. and it's called traveling on the rule. They do it every time they dribble now. Why is the NBA basically phase this out? Because the players are so young, they don't know any better. They're not taught any better, and they come up, and it's like, we have to adjust the players, or else it's going to be traveling every play. Nobody's going to score a point. Because the youth of American basketball is taught so poorly. They have so few skills overall when it comes to fundamentals that I can watch a college game and a pro game side by side. I wouldn't know which one's which. Exact same game.
And 2 weeks ago, before the Big Ten tournament, Tankathon.com had Zach Edey, the James Naismith frontrunner, 55th overall out of 58 draft-eligible players. So they had the James Naismith player as one of the last 3 or 4 picks in the entire draft. They moved him up 10 spots, but there's only 3 players in this draft class that can average 20 points a game, and they're all bigs. So why is he a second-round pick? Especially if he's the eventual James Naismith Award winner in a draft class with only 3 20-point scorers. That's really what infuriates me, because Chris Murray's Keegan Murray's younger brother, and Victor Wembanyama, he's a 7'2", 250-pound center that shoots threes like Steph Curry, and he is amazing. Okay, so I can't argue.
It's politics. It's not about skill. Well, it's not about the skills in that sense. It's more about, we have an image in the NBA. We want to keep it. Bigs are not as important unless they can play. I'm not
arguing that Wembanyama doesn't deserve to be the number 1 pick. I'm arguing that Chris Murray and Purdue center Zach Edey are both worthy of lottery picks. That's the argument Joey and I have been making for about 2 weeks now. That's all we're saying. We're not critiquing Wembanyama. Okay?
No, it's about Wembanyama has an image that he can do things that fit what NBA teams want. Those guys can't. But at the same token, when those guys get drafted, if they dominate, then the NBA is going to say, "Oh my God, we got a steal." No, you didn't. You just
the scary thing is, Joey, if all 3 bigs succeed, Chris Murray, Ben Edey, Victor Wembanyama, if all 3 become all-star players, we're going to see a comeback in bigs like we did with running backs in the NFL. We're going to see a comeback in centers.
Yeah.
It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, and I hope so, because the NBA was at its best when the big man was the center of attention. I mean, you can go back and watch any of the NBA finals from 1975 right through the early 2000s. Those are some of the best NBA finals you'll ever find. We're not just talking centers, we're talking big-time power forward. Okay? Those are the best NBA finals you'll ever watch.
Yeah.
It was when they started taking the emphasis off the big man. I mean, even the Bulls championship teams are like, oh, they didn't have great centers. It's like, Luke Longley and Bill Whittington, pretty dang good centers. But they didn't get a chance to show that they were pretty damn good centers because, oh, look at that. You had Rodman, you had Pippen, you had Horace Grant, you had Jordan, you had Paxson. Those were loaded rosters, okay? And Luke Longley was a very, very good center. And Bill Whittington was a very good backup. So there was a very good center combination there. But nobody ever talks about it. Because I hate to tell you, Longley was a great rebounder, a good defender. He had a hell of a mid-range jump shot. But just like Robert Parrish. Robert Parrish was an amazing center. He was easily a Hall of Fame center. He's in the Hall of Fame for a reason. He could have easily averaged 30 points a game. But he was third wheel behind Bird and McHale, and he embraced that. And when you embrace being the third wheel, but he was holding his own against Olajuwon, Ralph Sampson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, all those big centers of the 80s. Moses Malone, the original glass-shattering, big man. Between he and Daryl Dawkins, he held his own against Dawkins.
Well,
But
Wembanyama
people don't
dunks
talk about
like
him as
Shaq
much as
and
they do
shoots
Bird
like
McHale.
Curry. And he does kind of defend like David Robinson. So he's pretty complete as a prospect.
Well,
That's why he's probably going to go number one, regardless of how this tournament plays out.
Well, I doubt he dunks like Shaq because Shaq was 300 pounds of pure muscle.
Yeah.
So I do have to doubt that a little bit. You know, it's like Moses Malone.
I can understand why you're skeptical because a prospect this complete seems too good to be true, especially when you look at some of the centers like Greg Oden and Hashim Thabit who ended up being massive busts. And, you know, James Wiseman got traded from Golden State to Detroit. So he was drafted ahead of Melo Ball, and he got traded to Detroit. So I understand why you'd be skeptical.
Well,
a little, not completely.
So my skepticism comes with the dunking ability, because the dunking ability that you're talking about is somebody who is like Dawkins, Malone, or Shaq, who is nothing but muscle and does nothing but throw down with power. You know? Now, if the only person that can compare to those three in NBA history that I've seen so far as dunking power goes, that's not a center, would be Dominique Wilkins. And Dominique Wilkins, I don't know if there was a picture once, you could probably look it up, where he and his forward running mate Kevin Willis were shirtless. Dominique was freaking chiseled.
Yeah.
So unless that guy's chiseled and has massive explosion, I don't think he's coming anywhere close to Shaq, Dawkins, or Moses. And that's
but he
not
shoots like Curry.
Criticism of his game.
Have you ever seen a center with similar dunking ability to Shaq that shoots threes like Curry? That's what Wembanyama does. That's why he's going to be special. But he's not in the NCAA tournament. And we got to get to Princeton. It's 9:23 already. We got to get to Princeton. I got some MLS news, MLB news. I want to spend 10 and 11 a.m. focusing just on March Madness and NFL free agency. So let's get to Princeton, because you said before the podcast Princeton was the other upset that you saw in the tournament that stood out along with Fairleigh Dickinson. So
yeah, and that was something that was going on. Everybody was laughing. Princeton won, and they asked me, how did Princeton win? I'm like, they probably outsmarted them. They are an Ivy League school. I mean, they probably had more brain cells and came up and did something smarter. I mean, yes, was it the upset? Yeah. In a normal year, they won upset. Yeah. How did they win? They were probably smarter. But they're smarter than the other team. There's a good chance to win.
Yeah, and we could talk about Purdue losing the tournament, but they had such a dominant season. I don't think their coach is in any jeopardy of losing his job. And, you know, Arizona's highest draft prospect is a power forward currently projected 50 on Megathon. So Arizona, Azolas Tubelis, he averages 19.8 points a game at power forward. He's from Lithuania, 6'11", 245. He is a points machine, but his weaknesses are blocks, turnovers, and his draft age. He is almost 20. He's going to be 21 before the NBA draft. He's going to turn 21 this month. So that's why teams are shying away from him. But he's good with offensive and defensive rebounds. He's just got to work on controlling his turnovers and limiting them. But I want to see how Tubelis did against Princeton really quickly, and then we'll transition into soccer, because I have a few soccer headlines, but I want to see what he did, because I watched the game on television, but Tubelis had 22 points. He led Arizona in points. The problem is Arizona only scored 55 points, and 22 of those 55 points came from Tubelis. That's at least 40% of the offense, at least. I think that's 40%. 22 divided by 55 is 2/5 exactly. You can just slice the fractions in half, use inverse operations, and inverse order to reduce it to 2/5. So Arizona's best draft prospect scored 40% of the team's total points. This goes to show you, even if you have an NBA prospect on your team, if he's the only good player on your team, you might lose if the opponent has the perfect game plan and the coaching comes together. And Princeton, 4 for 25 on three-pointers, but Arizona was 3 for 16. Both teams struggled with three-point shots. Arizona actually had the better field goal percentage, better three-point percentage, and better but Princeton was more efficient on free throws. Princeton out-rebounded Arizona 38-37. Arizona had more assists, but Princeton won the blocks and steals battle. Princeton out-blocked Arizona 6-1, and they had more steals in Arizona 8-5. So this was a good defensive game by Princeton. They really stood out in terms of dominating the defensive aspect of the game. Because Tubelis only had 1 assist and 5 rebounds. Follow Arizona's center had 12 rebounds, but Princeton's leading scorer at 15 points. But everyone on Princeton's lineup except one player scored at least 6 points. So it was a collective team win for Princeton where everything came together for the Princeton Tigers. Because they were in a shootout against Yale on Sunday in the Ivy League Championship, and I saw the highlights for that. So, I mean,
Chris, I got a question for you. Do you remember what is still to this day the highest rated game in the history of basketball?
What do you think that is?
The highest. Oh, I know what it is.
Go ahead, tell our audience.
You know what it is? The 1979 NCAA Finals. Michigan State, Indiana State.
Magic.
A lot of people remember it. For the first time, Magic and Bird came together. Michigan State was a more talented team than they knew. Indiana State was a one-man show. So what did Michigan State do? They just outsmarted Indiana State. They knew that without Bird, they could not win. And it was 76-64, I believe, was the final score. And what they did, they shut out Bird. They were double, tripling him. They were making his life hell, and the rest of the team couldn't come up. And nobody else at that point during the season had been able to do that to Bird. They outsmarted. Michigan State outsmarted what was considered the best team in the nation by seeing, hey, we can take out this guy with 3 guys because nobody else was willing to commit those type of resources to one guy. Michigan State's like, we'll commit those resources. And they won by 12. They won the national championship pretty easily.
Well, one thing
I've
learned is that
one guy.
Don't pick a team. If a team can't recruit and reload, don't pick them. Because a reason I picked Arizona is both teams won their conferences. Arizona beat UCLA to win the Pac-12 title, and Arizona had the 1 NBA draft prospect. But they did lose 3 players to the 2022 NBA draft. They lost Benedict Mathurin, who's been fantastic as a rookie with the Pacers. They lost Dalen Terry, another first-round guard, and they lost Christian Coloco, a 7-foot center that was picked in the 2nd round. And while their center led in rebounds this year, he's not the scorer Coloco is. And without those supporting cast guys, that's probably why Arizona's power forwards had to carry the team this year. Whereas Princeton, it was just amazing defense by Princeton.
That just made me think of something. That just made me think of something that connects this whole thing together.
Because both Arizona and Purdue lost shooting guards to this year's NBA draft. Both Purdue, because Purdue had Jaden Ivey, who's on the Pistons, having a good rookie year with Cunningham's shin injury, and you have Benedict Mathurin, who went 1 pick later to the Pacers at number 6, and he's had a good rookie year too. And neither Purdue or Arizona could recruit a player good enough to replicate the star power those two brought to their teams. So I just think that's worth throwing out there before we get into the MLS news.
Yeah, here's the thing. Larry Bird, 79. Larry Bird, head coach of the Pacers, coach of the year. Larry Bird, executive of the year for the Pacers in 2012. Larry Bird is still considered a consultant with the Pacers. And they grabbed somebody from Arizona who was good, but did you ever think they'd end up being a superstar? Nah. Oh, look at that. He's becoming a superstar. Who's the consultant on the Pacers? Larry Bird. And now Arizona loses.
Yeah.
It all comes together.
It does.
It all comes together.
Yeah, I'm going to get into some of these MLS headlines. I'm going to keep these as brief as possible, but I've got a few that are kind of compelling. I'm going to give you a choice between 3 of these headlines. I've got 4 MLS headlines. I'm going to save the least interesting one for last, but there's 3 really compelling headlines. There's the rookies on Orlando that started last Saturday. There's St. Louis City FC, an expansion team that's 3-0. They are the second MLS expansion team in history to start 3-0. Only one expansion team won the MLS Cup. That was the Chicago Fire in 1998, 25 years ago. And there's the Philadelphia Union starting goalie Andre Blake suffered a groin injury last Saturday. He is expected to be out 4 to 8 weeks. Andre Blake, I've talked about him numerous times in the podcast. He was my highest rated prospect entering the MLS draft ever. I called him the Andrew Luck of college soccer players, and he had 15 shutouts last year in 34 starts. So he suffered a groin injury on Saturday. And he led the MLS in shutouts last year. So that is a pretty big storyline. St. Louis being 3-0 is a big storyline as an expansion team because they are the only 3-0 team in the league, and they're an expansion team. And then you got Orlando's MLS draft picks. 2 of Orlando's 3 first-round picks started on Saturday. And the scary thing is their number 2 overall pick hasn't even played in the MLS yet. They drafted 3 rookies at 2, 6, and 17. And the rookies at 6 and 17 both started their first MLS game on Saturday. So these 3 storylines, should we focus on Orlando, St. Louis being undefeated, or Philadelphia Union star goalie suffering a groin injury? Which one of these storylines is the most compelling? Because I think these are all good early season headlines. But
St. Louis.
Yeah, I
St.
agree.
Louis.
Because St. Louis was supposed to join the league last year, but because of COVID, the MLS gave them an extra year to prepare, and their sporting director, Lutz Fadelstedt, he's a former German soccer player. Lutz Fadelstedt has done an incredible job with this team. Like, I thought St. Louis addressed all of their team needs before the 2023 MLS draft. So what do? They trade the number 1 pick to Charlotte for number 20. And they use part of that $450,000 allocation money to move up to get their number 1 player at 9. So they give up $175,000 of that $450,000, but they're still able to keep $275,000 in allocation money. And a good free agent in soccer only costs about $90,000 to $100,000. Now Messi might cost a little bit more, but that's what a smart expansion team does versus what a dumb expansion team was. You use those extra 2 years to find veterans that can help you out. And St. Louis has gotten some really good players in their academy too. Like, they've found some players that are in the St. Louis area that are close to the age of 18 that are MLS ready. So they've done a tremendous job, and they're 3-0. They beat Austin in their opener. They won their home opener in week 2. And then they went on the road to Portland last week and won. So St. Louis, they got their first road victory. I think they got their first victory on the road in Charlotte on the East Coast, and then they won on the West Coast. And no, they beat Austin in week 1 on the road, because we both called Austin our pick to win the Western Conference. We wouldn't shut up about Austin. So they went on the road, Austin, and they won at home, and then they won against Portland on the West Coast. So Portland was the 2021 MLS Cup runner-up. So they're 3-0.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough schedule. It's not like they were playing nobody. I mean, it wasn't like they were given an easy schedule to start out with. I mean, it's impressive.
LAFC is number 1 in the MLS power rankings, and they're still 2-0. But that's because their season opener with the LA Galaxy at the Rose Bowl got pushed back to the 4th of July. That game got canceled due to poor weather. So they pushed that game back. So yeah, LAFC's 2-0 through 2 games, but they're not 3-0. And the only 3-0 team in the entire league is the expansion team. So that's a pretty incredible story.
And it's not. Yeah, it's not nearly as impressive as,
Now, I'm not saying LAFC doesn't deserve to be number one, but I think you could genuinely make a case for St. Louis SC being number one. That's all I'm saying. It's still early. There's a lot of soccer. I mean, MLS regular season is 34 weeks, and they're expanding the playoffs from 7 teams in each conference to 9 teams in each conference. So that means 18 of the 29 teams will get in, but the top seed in each conference will get a bye. And if you're St. Louis, that bye is.
Did they expand the record?
You're an expansion team, and you get that only bye in the conference. Season? That is huge for you, man. I can't stress that enough.
Yeah. Did they expand the regular season? I could have sworn it was 27.
Yeah.
I could have sworn it was only 27 weeks. Did they expand that?
They at some point when I wasn't looking? It was 27 teams 2 years ago. Charlotte became the 28th team, and St. Louis became 29. And they're going to expand it to 30 with either Las Vegas or San Diego. They haven't decided, but Gardner said 30 is good. I don't want to go past 30 right now. He pretty much said he doesn't want to go past 30. But both San Diego and Las Vegas are campaigning like hell. And I'm just afraid if they give San Diego the team over Vegas, that they're going to expand to 32 eventually. And I think they should just expand to Vegas and stop. Just expand to Vegas and stop, because, there's talks that the NHL wants to expand for 36 teams and give Houston a team, give Atlanta a team. It's like Atlanta relocated twice. Sorry, guys. You guys have to wait. And I think the NHL is smart enough to realize that it's great these teams want expansion franchises, but they're not going to get an opportunity unless somebody relocates. It's just the nature of the NHL right now, Could the NHL...
Yeah, and I asked the audience to forgive my math skills, because when I said 27 and we're talking about an expansion team, that 27 plus 20 was 28. So I do ask the audience to forgive my lack of math skills.
That's all right, because Charlotte was 28 and St. Louis is 29. So, but here's the kicker. Let's talk about the Union situation, because Andre Blake suffered a groin injury last week, but what's even more fascinating is for the first 2 games of the season, Holden Trent, the Union's first-round pick, was the third-string goalie on the roster. The Union demote him to their MLS Next team, and Andre Blake gets injured, so the backup goalie to Andre Blake comes in, but if Andre Blake's out 4 to 8 weeks with a groin injury, all of a sudden the Union have to bring that third-string goalie back up to the MLS roster as a backup, because, if this backup goalie gets injured in the next 4 to 8 weeks, Holden Trent's your starter for a few games. I mean, that is the reality of the situation, Joey. It may not be pretty, but that is the reality of the business. I mean, you just said third-string goalie down to the minor leagues.
I mean, that's
now you got to bring him back up when your starter was injured. So, and the backup goalie did get a shutout win. So, in his credit, good job. But,
yeah, and that's exactly what happened to the Browns. It's like first play that I watched Nick Harris go down. Ethan Pochis came in. Week 13, Ethan Pochis goes down. Third-string center comes in. I believe the third-string center went down, and we're down to the fourth-string center. So having these guys on the roster, or at least being available, it sucks. Nobody likes it. You can watch your entire line or defense or whatever it is fall apart, but having them there at least gives you something.
Yeah, and this
because without them being there,
Holden Trent was the consensus best goalie in the draft, and he fell to the Union at 28. I mean, Holden Trent was Florian's number 1 goalie, and Travis Clark of Top Draw Soccer had him as the number 1 goalie for the 2023 Super Draft in January of 2022. Yet he gave up 5 goals to UNC Greensboro and 6 to Stanford against big-time opponents, despite winning Conference Goalie of the Year 2 years in a row. And the Red Bulls and Inter Miami both pass on him. So he falls to the Eastern Conference champion Philadelphia Union at 29. Works his tail off, makes the final roster, one of 12 super draft picks to make the final roster, actually is a backup for the first 2 games, gets demoted, starting goalie gets injured, now he's back on the MLS roster, and if something happens to the backup, Holden Trent, the 28th overall pick in the MLS draft, is playing. I mean, that's the reality of the situation, whether you like it or not, because that's how FC Cincinnati's season started last year. They had 2 goalies in free agency. They had a goalie in free agency, their starting goalie. Both goalies fucked up. And then Roman Celentano, the second pick in the draft, comes in and carries FC Cincinnati to the playoffs as a rookie goalie. So, and they actually won in the first round. So, Philadelphia's situation with Holden Trent's looking very similar to what FC Cincinnati had last year with Roman Celentano. I'm not saying Holden Trent's going to play, but the High Point goalie was Florian's top goalie in the Super Draft, and I think it's a story we got to keep an eye on in the coming weeks with the Philadelphia Union, because Andre Blake, best goalie in the league, he has a groin injury. They're saying it could be as few as 4 weeks, as little as 8 weeks. So you've already played 3 of your 34 games, and now you don't have your number 1 goalie for the next 4 to 8 weeks because he's recovering from a groin injury.
And we also have to take into consideration that maybe one of these backups ends up being their Ethan Pocic, where he signed as a backup. He didn't expect to play, but he's called upon, and it's like, oh, he actually fits pretty well with this team. And he comes out and plays incredibly well. I mean, so there's also the consideration that one of these guys is like, he just fits with this team. He fits with their mindset. He fits with what they do. And he comes out there, and as it looks right now, Pocic is taking Nick Harris's starting center spot. So who's to say one of these guys isn't going to take the starting goalie spot?
I mean, we could be looking at a Brock Purdy type scenario, as crazy as it sounds. If the Union's backup gets injured,
Purdy, yeah.
I mean, if the Union's backup goalie gets injured, Holden Trent is the starter. And if he keeps winning every goalie start like Brock Purdy did at quarterback, who's to say he's not the guy? I mean, there were only 2 goalies in this draft that I had first-round grades on. Russell Shealy, the goalie for Syracuse that won the national title, and Holden Trent. And I had both goalies ranked 25 and 26 out of 29 players. So they were both late firsts for me. Unlike the 2 goalies that were Generation Adidas underclassmen in Patrick Schultz and Roman Celentano, who were both in my top 12, this goalie situation was a little different. I had late firsts on these guys, but Holden Trent was the guy that was a unanimous first-round pick in every mock draft. He was Travis Clark's goalie 1 for most of the process. He was Florian's goalie 1. He was my goalie 1 at the beginning of the process, but then Shealy wowed me near the end of the process and barely moved 1 spot ahead of Holden Trent. But Holden Trent was the consensus best goalie. And Cole Jensen of Xavier and Elliot Panico from Yale both ended up getting drafted ahead of him. And the Yale goalie wasn't even at the MLS Combine, whereas the Xavier goalie, Cole Jensen, was at the MLS College Showcase, working out in front of MLS teams. And Jensen's the tallest goalie in the draft, but he's kind of raw. So I was kind of surprised that David Beckham's team took him ahead of the goalie that was seen as the consensus best goalie in Holden Trent. But he falls to a great situation. The Union, the defending Eastern Conference champions, 11 returning starters. So Union have every starter from last year's MLS Cup team back, but their goalie's injured. So, and the backup goalie did well. So right now, Holden Trent's the backup goalie. He gets to come back to MLS for a few months and get that learning experience. And
Chris,
I want to see.
I know you like to. Yeah, and I know you like to harp on me a little bit because I don't take the. Because I don't outwardly express how seriously I take depth charts. But I do take them seriously, and in situations like this, you hear how seriously I take them because you have to have that
your
backup
dedication to MLS, Joey. I do, because you're looking at the goalie situation. You got the number 1 goalie in the league injured with a groin injury, and you got the backup goalie, and the goalie you just drafted in the first round is the backup to the backup goalie. So it's kind of compelling to see how this is going to play out over the next few months.
It is. And I may not understand MLS strategy. In fact, half the time I'm lost. But I do understand the skills of a lot of these guys, especially the goalies. And I understand how those skills work. I just don't understand a damn thing about the strategy behind it. Now, and that can sometimes leave me seeming aloof. But the players are the players. I can break down the players. This don't have to break down strategy because I will sit there like a deer in the headlights. I will sit there looking like a deer in the headlights. I got nothing.
Yeah. I'm going to talk about the Orlando City SC rookies now because they drafted 3 rookies in the first round. Their number 2 pick's still not ready to play yet, but they drafted Duncan McGuire, the top senior in the Super Draft, 6, and Duncan McGuire was amazing last week. He played all 90 minutes in Orlando's 1-1 draw with DC United. He scored the only goal for Orlando in their 1-1 draw, whereas the other rookie, right back, Abdi Salim, got benched after the first half after starting. And Orlando traded their right back.
We said McGuire would be good.
They took Duncan McGuire at 6.
We said McGuire would be good. We knew this.
Yeah, I mean,
we knew this.
We knew McGuire was going to be good because he led the NCAA with 23 goals. Yet he fell to 6 because he was a junior redshirt, not an underclassman, not a Generation Adidas player, but he was.
Oh, that stupid youth fucking thing is going on again. The stupid youth fucking thing. It's like, come on, guys. Talent is talent.
Yeah,
talent, I mean, talent. And in this day of medical advancement, you're not looking at. Yeah, you're not looking at Larry Bird and Michael Jordan going down with injuries.
Washington, they beat Washington in the round of 32. They beat Duke in the Elite 8, and he actually got Creighton to 2 goals. I think a goal and assist against Syracuse. He had a goal and assist against Syracuse against the eventual national champion Syracuse Orange, and Syracuse won that game. But Creighton pushed Syracuse to their limit. I mean.
And that's another thing that irritates me. Yeah, I know I'm going off on a few rants here. But
he had 23 goals. He was the best player in the draft in terms of goal scoring by a mile. But because he's a junior redshirt, he's not considered an underclassman. He's considered a little bit older than the rest of the players in the draft, so he falls to 6. I had him at 7 on my big board. He was my top speaker. We both loved him.
That's stupid shit. Yeah, because that stupid shit reason for false. And for the love of fuck, why did Syracuse shorten their name to the Orange? That's shit you wash your car with. The orange stuff. Okay? They were the Orange Men. It's like, they might as well say, we are the Syracuse Orange shit. You know that stuff you wash your car with? You know, yeah, we wax that shit. We're the stuff you wax on your car. Okay? It's like, come on. It's like, at least we know, hey, you're men and you're orange. Now it's like, you're orange shit. We wax you on a car. Get your ass on that car now.
Orlando got Duncan McGuire at 6. They drafted Shakur Mohammed, who was the ACC Freshman of the Year in 2021 and the ACC Player of the Year in 2022. And most of the media have actually predicted Shakur Mohammed to go number 1 overall. The Duke midfielder fell to 2, and he'll get to play with Duncan McGuire once he's healthy and cleared to play. That's going to be scary. There's even some speculation Mohammed might make his debut tonight. And honestly, I'd play him. I cannot wait to see what Orlando does because they drafted 3 guys in the first round, and all 3 are on the MLS roster. 2 started last week, and the one guy who didn't was the second pick in the draft. And I'm going to continue this rant because Hamady Diop, the number 1 pick in the draft, was injured for the first 3 games. He was officially cleared to play yesterday.
That fucker's still injured?
No, he's cleared, Joey. Hamady Diop was cleared from his injury.
Oh, he did get cleared?
He got cleared.
Okay, I was going to say, he seems like he's
in the MLS draft is playing Duncan McGuire tonight. That's happening when Charlotte plays Orlando.
Okay.
We got the number 1 pick in the MLS draft versus Duncan McGuire. Hamidi Diop, the Clemson defender, who went number 1 overall. His film against Valentin Noel was kind of shaky, and I watched him against Indiana. He's good, but he's not consistent. Like,
okay, yeah, because when you said he was still when you said something about him being injured, I'm like, yeah, he's still injured. Like, how long?
I had Hamidi Diop at number 10 on my big board.
I'm glad it got clear.
I had Hamidi Diop at number 10 on my big board. I mocked him at 16. Travis Clark of Top Draw Soccer mocked him at 13. What does that tell you? That you shouldn't trade up from 20 to 1 to get a player if they're not a unanimous top 10, unanimous top 5 pick.
No, absolutely not. Like in our group mock draft, you were saying, hey, this guy's still there. I forget who it was. He's still there. He can trade up.
Ryan Bayless poached him from me, and I kept trying to trade up with Ken, Sean, but they wanted first rounders plus my second and thirds, and it's like that's not how this works. So
and for me, it was like I was like, and a little off topic here, but when we do a 7th round, it's going to be completely different because of the Browns free agency. We'll get to that later.
It is, because
it's the thing about trading up.
3 4th-round picks plus 4 6th-round picks. The Patriots have 4 6th-round picks plus 3 4th-round picks. So Wes and the Lions don't have a 4th-round pick. If he wants a 4th-round pick, he's going to have to give me something for one of those picks. Or if I want Wes's 3rd-round pick, we could make a trade with him. I mean, logistically, I don't think the Patriots are going to hold on to all those picks in real life. They're going to try to move one of those 4s for Hopkins, lowball the Cardinals, and if that doesn't work, they'll try to lowball the Broncos for Judy, because if the reports are the Patriots have only offered a 4th for DeAndre Hopkins, they probably only offered a 4th for Jerry Judy, despite the fact the Broncos want a 1st for Jerry. Judy's not getting 1st-round value because of his injury history. He's a good player, but he's not going to get a 1st-round pick now because of his injury history, because he had injuries.
Well, that's also what's holding up the trade to the Browns. What I hear is that they want too much in compensation. But that all comes down to what we're talking about, is to overpaying in a trade for compensation. That's the roundabout here that we're getting at, is that you don't overtrade, you especially don't massively overhype.
My guess is Andrew Berry only offered him at 7. Because if the Patriots only offered a 4th for Hopkins, and the Cardinals want a 2nd plus another asset for Hopkins, my guess is Andrew Berry's thinking, maybe I can get 32-year-old Hopkins for only a 5th because he's older than Amari Cooper despite being bigger and arguably more lethal.
And that's the same thing that's been keeping from Jerry Jeudy. It's like you said, they want a 1st rounder for Jeudy. The Browns, I have a feeling, are only willing to give up a 3rd.
And
I have a feeling that's the same thing for the
Patriots. Probably the biggest reason why nobody wants to deal a 1st or 2nd, because I think he missed some time. Yeah. He had a good his rookie season was decent. Then I think he suffered a season-ending injury in year 2. He came back in year 3.
Yeah.
Stayed healthy at first, but he did miss some games in year 3. So I think that is a reason why teams are a little bit shy about paying a premium for Jeudy. Not saying he won't get it.
Well, he's an amazing talent, but you're not going to overprice it like they did for Diop to try to get a guy who isn't quite worth it, no matter what.
I'm going to give you one more fact, Joey, before we transition away from soccer. And here we go. Right now, if the 2023 MLS season ended today, Charlotte FC would have the number 1 pick in the 2024 Super Draft. And guess what? When Charlotte traded up for Patrick Egimang out of Rhode Island, they sent their 2024 first-round pick, the Colorado Rapids. So the Rapids would own the number 1 pick in the draft via trade if the season ended today. And the only other 2 winless teams in the league are the CF Montreal and the Houston Dynamo, who traded out of the first round 3 times, but they're 0-2. But Charlotte has the worst goal differential, so they would have the number 1 pick, and they traded their first rounder to Colorado. So if the season ended today, the Rapids, who I'm going to check where the Rapids are in the standings because I don't think we've ever seen.
I expected them to be a playoff team. So
in the MLS draft. That's actually pretty amazing. Colorado actually won back in 2021. The Rapids won the President's Trophy or the what is it? The Supporter Shield for the best regular season record. No, they won the Western Conference. No, the Revolution won the Supporter Shield, but two years ago, the Colorado Rapids were the #1 seed in the Western Conference. Like, they were the actual top seed, and they had home field in Denver at Dick's Sporting Goods field. So 2 years ago, Colorado had the #1 seed in the Western Conference, and now we're looking at, okay, they are number 10th in the Western. Colorado is currently 13th in the Western Conference, but they've only played they've played 3 games and they're 0-2-1. So they have a tie. They've lost 2 games, but they do have a tie. So they do have 1 point. And right now they're only 2 points back of a playoff spot because currently Portland and Real Salt Lake 3 points each. Those 2 teams occupy the final playoff spot. So it's still early. Colorado could still improve. And they drafted Moise Bombito 3rd overall out of New Hampshire. This was the first super draft where 5 international players went in top 5, and they drafted a center back 3rd overall. So I have to think if they end up with the #1 pick, they're probably going to pick either a striker or a midfielder, either Jefferson Amaya from High Point or maybe Palmer Alt out of Butler. Palmer Alt's dad won Mr. Indiana in basketball, and Palmer Alt won Mr. Indiana in soccer. So they're the only father-son tandem to ever win Mr. Indiana in high school sports. So that's pretty impressive. And both the dad and son follow me on Twitter. So I'm thinking Palmer Alt, who had 10 goals as a freshman at Butler.
Yeah,
that's who Progs. Progs is already doing research for the 2024 MLS draft.
You know what?
Him and Florian are kicking ass.
You know what I'm looking for?
Us 3 scouting these guys, having fun. And that's pretty much because the other media outlets didn't even do a second round for soccer. And the MLS team saw that we did, and they pretty much picked some of the players that we mocked in rounds 2 and 3. So I think that's kind of impressive. That says more about our work ethic. We're not trying to embarrass our competitors. That just shows.
Do you know what I'm waiting for? You know the prospect I'm waiting for? I'm waiting for Danny Ainge to be reincarnated. People don't forget, he is the only person in high school sports history to be an All-American in basketball, baseball, and football. I am waiting for that type of prospect.
Well, the Purdue Center is a 3-sport athlete. Remember the Purdue Center I told you about, Edie, in the first hour of the show? He played hockey, baseball, and basketball. So he's the only 3-sport athlete in this year's NBA draft. You can get him in the second round.
But was he an All-American in all 3?
Yes.
First team All-American in all 3.
Not first team, but he was All-American in all 3.
The first team All-American in all 3, Danny Ainge remains the only athlete in modern American sports to ever do it. CEO of the Phoenix Suns, I mean, you wouldn't think it now, but I mean, Danny Ainge, he was a fiery little rascal back in his day, and a heck of an athlete. I'm waiting on a prospect like that. First team All-American, all of them.
And yeah,
I'm not devaluing what he's done.
Montreal could end up with the #1 pick too. They're Florian's team. I mean, he lives in France. His favorite MLS team is CF Montreal. He has a friend who writes for CF Montreal on Culture Soccer. So if Montreal gets the #1 pick after losing their coach to Columbus,
Florian lives in France.
Yeah. That's his Twitter handle is French College Soccer. That's his Twitter handle. So.
Yeah,
and I think over the last years,
so
even though Ives Galserep and Travis Clark are considered the 2 most experienced soccer insiders for the MLS draft, I would argue Florian and myself have outworked everyone in soccer of the last 2 years as far as scouting goes. Just scouting players, going to games in person, and networking. I would argue Florian and myself have outworked everyone else on Twitter the last 2 years. I'm not saying we're the most experienced or the
Yeah,
best guys in the industry. I would argue, as far as just going to games in person, networking, scouting, we've outworked our competition. That's all. That's a fair argument, but you got to keep going.
and I do apologize because I did think Florian moved to the States.
Florian's lived in France his entire life.
My bad.
I mean, his Twitter handle's French College Soccer. That's his handle.
Yeah. I thought I heard somewhere he was moving to the States, so that's my bad.
That's good. But yeah, he's pretty cool.
At least I'm trying to keep up.
He's like you, except he's a soccer guy instead of a football guy, and he actually coaches kids in soccer.
I'm not gonna knock him. Florian's always been great, so I'm not gonna. I mean, I think he's had him on the podcast once or twice. I mean, he's always been, good to us. He's always been incredibly knowledgeable, and I got nothing but respect for it.
I do. Same here.
I mean, the man is incredibly knowledgeable about everything he does. So if he says that somebody is going to be big time, he'd be foolish not to listen.
Yeah, because
I don't care if it's basketball, soccer, or what.
Number 10. We thought Daniel Mooney was a massive reach at number 10, but San Jose took him at number 10 anyway. And Diop's tape was inconsistent. Florian was shocked he went number 1 after rewatching the film cut we did on him.
It's like Florian is the man when it comes to that stuff. I mean, especially soccer.
Yeah.
I mean, I know he clues in on basketball every now and then, but soccer is his main thing, and he is the man. He knows exactly what he's talking about. And I'm surprised that he doesn't have some type of front office role with somebody over there, because he is incredibly smart.
I think he's better than some of the insiders with blue check marks that have been in this field longer than myself. So it's just like his work ethic and his passion for college soccer, I think it's greater than mine, if I'm being completely honest. But, I just think this is going to be interesting season, because you have Charlotte, who, if they have the league's worst record, Colorado gets the number 1 pick in the draft. Montreal's in the discussion to potentially get the number 1 pick, and Houston, who traded 3 first-rounders for allocation money, is 0-2. And those are the only winless teams heading into week 4. So every other team in the league has a tie or a win. Those 3 teams do not have a tie or a win through the 34-game season. So,
well, for me, I'm looking at soccer. Soccer, we've been saying this for years.
We don't even know if the worst team in the league is going to get the number 1 pick, because there are rumors that San Diego might come to the MLS in 2024. So if the expansion team gets awarded, they could join the league this year, but I'm thinking San Diego or Las Vegas will join the league in 2025, because if Don Garber, the commissioner of MLS, is putting that off until the fall, until the end of the soccer season, my guess is they're going to need to approve stadium funding, other logistics, and that's going to push back the team until 2025 or 2026. I'm not saying there won't be a 30th team. There will be, but the 30th team might not join the league until 2025 or 2026 with a new stadium a year later. That's all I'm saying. Yeah. And I think logistically that's probably how it will go out. And I don't want to make an MLS mock until we know for certain, until we know, is the worst team in the league this year going to get the number 1 pick, or is another expansion team going to be picking at 1? Because it's a complicated, delicate matter with 29 teams.
And I'm always of the belief that when something like this happens, the announcement is going to come when there's nothing else going on, because they don't want to overshadow it. Unless you're fucking Aaron Rodgers and decide to go and announce your life on Pat McAfee's show.
Well, in previous years, Don Garber's
outside of Aaron Rodgers,
during the MLS Cup, the championship game, like during the pregame or during halftime, that's when Don Garber's announced expansion teams in previous years. He's also announced those teams during the MLS Super Draft or leading up to the Super Draft. So Since the Super Draft's now a virtual event, my guess is he will announce the expansion team at this year's MLS Cup, which will be in November or December, if I had to take an educated guess right now.
Yeah, because it's normally you're not going to announce it.
Because they were going to announce Las Vegas as the 30th team last year in 2022. They were going to announce early in 2022 that Las Vegas was getting the 30th team, but those plans got put on hold, and San Diego's been trying hard like crazy to get that 30th team. So I think they are going to announce this at the MLS. They're going to let San Diego and Las Vegas both do their due diligence and make their case, and they're going to pick the better team in October. And you're not ruling out other teams like Detroit and Phoenix, but it's probably going to be San Diego or Las Vegas, and they're probably going to announce it at MLS.
Yeah, I actually think San Diego would probably be a better place. A better, I think they're just a better location. I think they would be a better overall situation, better weather, so on and so forth.
Because San Diego's already got a football/soccer friendly stadium in place. Like, they've got the proposal in place, they've got the funding from the city in place, they've got all that ready to go. They just need approval and green light from the league, whereas MLS wants Las Vegas to build an indoor soccer stadium separate from Allegiant, separate from T-Mobile. And people Las Vegas, they'd rather build an outdoor stadium. And the reason Bill Foley withdrew his bid to buy the Vegas MLS team is because it's more expensive to buy an MLS team than it is to buy a Premier League team. Did you know that? Because you have to pay a $500 million expansion fee, plus you have to pay anywhere between $500 million and $1 billion to build the stadium. So, that.
But Premier League doesn't have all the excess fees.
Yeah. So the Premier League does not have those excess fees that MLS does. So that's why Bill Foley, the Vegas Golden Knights owner, withdrew his bid to buy the team. Wes Edens is still the favorite to buy the Vegas MLS team if they get the 30th team, but that's why Foley withdrew from buying. And I think that's pretty revealing.
Chris, here, I've got a question for you about the Premier League. Is FIFA in charge? Are they the governing body over the Premier League, or
Premier League is like Arsenal, Chelsea, Manchester United? I watch the MLS. I do not watch the Premier League. If you got a Premier League question, you should message Brian Lewis and ask him about that, because I only watch MLS and college soccer, if I'm being honest with you, Joey.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I just thought you'd know a little bit about it. I know FIFA is the international governing body, but I didn't know whether they also
FIFA's expanding too. If you want to, I know we're taking a long time with the soccer rant, but FIFA's expanding. They have reported FIFA's going to expand from 32 teams to 48. They're going to have 24. They're going to expand from 8 regions of 4 teams to 12 regions of 4 teams. They're going to have 12 groups instead of 8. Top 2 will get in. So that's 24 to 32, and then the other 8 seeds will be highest point totals. So they're expanding the
Well, it's not like American sports where you have a small amount of area to cover and 50 states. You literally have the entire Europe and Asian continent.
Yeah,
you had for the Premier League. So
you had 8 groups of 4 teams, 32 teams. Now you're going to have 12, and that's going to expand the groups from 32 to 48. So you're going to have 48 teams qualifying for the World Cup, but instead of the top 16 playing in knockout rounds, it's going to be the top 32 playing in knockout rounds. That's going to be the new format. So for the 2026 World Cup. And that World Cup's going to be in North America, because Canada, USA, and Mexico are all going to get games for the 2026 World Cup. So there's going to be FIFA World Cup games in Canada, there's going to be FIFA World Cup games in the US, and there's going to be FIFA World Cup games in Mexico, all in North America. Pretty incredible how they're putting all this together for 2026.
Yeah. And I'm not...
Not only are they expanding, they're having games in all 3 areas of North America, which I think is awesome.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I think soccer is expanding exponentially at this point, and I'm happy to see it. I just wish I understood the strategy more, and I've tried to, but something just doesn't click in my brain when it comes to soccer strategy. Kind of like what I'm sure a lot of Europeans feel like when they watch American football, and they're like, "What the hell is happening here?"
All right.
So I'm
This,
kind of in that cultural gap.
this has
But
been a
I
great
do
segment.
commend soccer and their players.
This has been a great soccer segment, but it's 10-11. I'm going to quickly name the top 6 AL and NL teams in my MLB season preview. You will get the playoff predictions next week and suggestions next Saturday. But I went through fangraphs.com. I looked up the starting rotations and the injury reports for every single MLB team, and my top 6 for the American League at number 6, the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim. They have Reed Detmers, the 10th overall pick in the 2020 MLB draft, is the number 5 starter in the Angels rotation. If he can put everything together, you have Shohei Ohtani. You have another good pitcher with a low ERA, and the 2 stars in the Angels are Shohei Ohtani, who shared AL MVP with Aaron Judge, and Mike Trout, who's been a beast in fantasy baseball for years. So Ohtani and Trout are the 2 stars on the Angels, but we really haven't seen the Angels, Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, in the playoffs in a long time. So they are my dark horse to get in over Toronto. Because remember, Toronto fired their manager midseason and still made the playoffs, despite having a shaky rotation outside their top 2 guys. They had incredible bats, despite a shaky pitching rotation. And I gave the Angels that last spot over Toronto because I think their pitching rotation is just a little bit better than Toronto. And you could argue with Ohtani and Trout, they have just as much star power as Toronto. And Toronto's got Bo Bichetti, Vladimir Guerrero Jr. They got a lot of batters. But at the same time, it's like, you know, if there's a team that's going to beat them out, I don't think we're going to get the exact same 6 teams we got a year ago. And it really leaves you with the Angels, the White Sox, the Twins, and maybe the Orioles if someone were to replace Toronto. And I just like the Angels the best. I put the Mariners, I put the Tampa Bay Rays at 5. Love their pitching, their batting. They couldn't score against the Guardians, so I put them at 5. I put the Astros at 4 because they lost Justin Verlander. I've got the Seattle Mariners at 3. And I was going to put the Yankees at 1, but the free agent the Yankees signed, Carlos Rodon, is currently on the IL, the injury list, heading into spring training. So I have the Yankees at 2, and I have the
Is
Cleveland
it
Guardians
60
at 1.
day?
And that was the deciding factor with putting the Guardians at 1. We'll break down all these
Well,
scenarios next Saturday, but that
30
is
day or 60
for
days?
the AL. Thoughts before I get to the NL?
30 day or 60 day DA?
It's like a 15-day IL. It's not like I
Oh,
don't know how serious
okay.
it is.
15
He's
days?
injured, but he's not on the IL or
Okay.
DL. So
Okay, yeah, because I know
it's
there's a
something to keep an
15
eye
day,
on,
but usually
because he's their number
most
2
teams
pitcher.
just go,
And if he's
yeah,
out, that's going to make the Yankees
yeah,
extremely dependent on Garrett Cole.
absolutely. Absolutely. And the 15 days not used very often. It's usually 30 or 60.
Sometimes it's 15,
I mean,
sometimes
to
it's
say
30,
it
sometimes
tells me that they're, yeah,
I'm not saying it's
yeah,
something
telling me
to
it's
worry
a
about,
15
but I'm a
day.
little bit concerned because the AL East was the toughest division in
I'm not.
baseball last year, whereas the AL Central was a complete joke of a division, and the Guardians are going to have – Guardians won that division with the youngest team in the league, and they only lost 1 player.
Well, I'm not as concerned as you are because for me, I'm looking at it like I was thinking 30 day, 60 day, and you say 15. I'm like, oh, if it's 15, they're just basically looking to free up a roster spot for a couple weeks so they don't lose as much. I mean, it's not anything that's gonna. It's like 2 starts. I mean, maybe 3. I mean, that doesn't concern me. Now, if it was a month or 2 months, like a 30 or 60 day ADL, that would have concerned me because that's a lot of games in there in baseball. So that would have concerned me. But the 15 day, I always felt was just a blip on the radar. It doesn't really concern me.
Okay,
Now,
right
if they
now,
expand
the
that
Yankees
and
projected
put them
injury
after
list
that,
is
something
Carlos
different.
Rodon. And Carlos Rodon has a strained forearm. He's not coming off of arthroscopic shoulder surgery like Frankie Montes, and he did not have Tommy John surgery. So, yeah, Frankie Montes
Strained forearm. That's
Frankie
it.
Montes had arthroscopic shoulder surgery on February 21st, 2023. And Luis Gil is coming off Tommy John surgery from May of last year. So Gil and Montez, I think, were in that starting rotation. I am going to look up their ERAs. So Gil got demoted to AAA, but because Gil only started one game at an ERA of 9, and then he had Tommy John surgery in that one start, and he's only 24. Whereas Frankie Montes, what did Montes do last year? I'm kind of curious. Frankie Montes was Frankie Montes had a 5-12 record with the A's and Yankees, and Montes had a 4.05 ERA after 2 really good years in 2019 and 2021. He had a 4.05 ERA. Not his worst year, though. He had an ERA of 5 one year and an ERA of 7 when he was 24. So, I mean, he's had a few good seasons, but he's been really inconsistent. And he had arthroscopic surgery in 2023. So, I can't say for certain if he was a top 5 pitcher in the Yankees rotation. But if he had arthroscopic shoulder surgery, that might limit the depth of the Yankees starting rotation, because right now you have Garrett Cole, Luis Severino are the only 2 starting pitchers with ERAs of under 3.6 on the entire Yankees rotation right now. And I think Severino can be a good number 3 when Rodon comes back, but that is incredibly concerning with Montes and Gil, in addition to Rodon, all having injuries at the moment for the Yankees. And I think that ultimately was the reason I gave the Guardians the number 1 slot, because they are, on paper, they are healthier than the Yankees right now. I'm not saying the Yankees can't beat the Guardians again. I'm saying right now, if we're projecting the top 6 teams in the AL, I would give the Guardians the top spot simply because they're healthier.
The Yankees are proving why I like softball better than baseball, is because one of the big reasons, outside of the fact that it's a faster game and it's more exciting, is that
there's a new rule in baseball,
injuries
Joey.
are
very rule.
This
year, pitchers are only going to have 20 seconds to get rid of the baseball. That is going into effect this season. And Benjamin Albright hates the rule, but I bet you kind of enjoy it. Well, it's a wait and see for you as a fan.
Not really. It's a stupid rule. It's like they're just getting tired of seeing guys on TV grabbing themselves for 15, 20 seconds at a time. So when you get rid of the ball, so you don't do that.
So there's going to be a 20-second clock to get rid of the ball for all pitching moving forward.
But you also have to look at it. Pitching a baseball is an unnatural motion. The body's not made for that. That's why you get the shoulder injury. That's why you get the Tommy John surgery. So, when was the last time you heard of a softball pitcher having Tommy John surgery? No, because the motion that they use to pitch is 100% natural. Everything's natural. The entire way up through there. You know, their warm-ups are literally underhand into the glove sometimes. And when they're warming up, 5 feet away, underhand. 10 feet away, underhand. Just loosen up the elbow. And after that, how many elbow injuries or Tommy John injuries do you see a softball player having? The only thing they had to do is loosen up the elbow muscle. Oh, what the baseball players have to do? The shoulder, the elbow, the wrist.
Yeah,
they have to do
Scott and John Schultz did a podcast, and I think one of the ESPN guys, maybe it wasn't Passan, but I know one of the ESPN or one of the media guys, and John Schmaltz did a podcast, and the media guy said, with the pitchers having to pitch quicker, that's an advantage for the batters. And Schmaltz replied, no, because the pitcher already knows the batter's weaknesses. That gives the batter less time to prepare and adjust to what the pitcher's going to do. And he made a really intelligent argument. And he just put that media reporter.
Here's an argument for an umpire's point of view. Umpires a lot of times will skew the rules for batters, because a batter, once they step in, you know how they step in and they're crouched down and then they'll adjust once they're in the batter's box? Once they step in there, that's their strike zone. Once they put one foot in that box, that is their strike zone. But umpires will make the batters they will give a favorable strike zone to batters. One of the reasons that when I was behind the plate, people hated me because I wouldn't do that. It's like, you step in there, that's your strike zone.
But here's another surprising thing about the Yankees. The Yankees did not sign any batters in free agency this year, which is kind of surprising because that's what they're known for historically. They kept their same exact top 9 as last year. Isn't that kind of surprising, Joey?
Whatever. It's the Yankees. But what the rule does, it does not allow the batter to skew the strike zone. They step in, they've got to get ready immediately. They can't go up, down, switch their feet, scratch their nose, scratch their ass, and all that. That quick go means they got to get ready, which means when they step in there, they ain't going up and down trying to figure out a way to manipulate the strike zone. They are getting in there, and that is actually, this is the one thing I will say about this rule that I like, is that it does not give the batter a chance to put himself in the position to work the strike zone. That's what I like about this rule. And as far as the Yankees go, it's the Yankees.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising.
The Guardians were more active
in free agency than the Yankees. I believe the Guardians signed 2 batters in free agency.
That I will agree with. The Guardians had a very good free agency.
Re-signed most of their core 9 from last year and players they got at the trade deadline. So they did have players with contracts expiring, but they just re-signed most of their batters. The Guardians got Josh Bell. He was a former Pittsburgh. I think he was drafted by the Pittsburgh Pirates. He played for the Brewers, he played for someone else last year. I remember having a first-round grade on Josh Bell. I had him at like 15 on my big board in 2011 in the first MLB
Didn't he participate in the All-Star game?
Nino was drafted 3rd overall by the Mariners the following year, and they added him too. So, just
Didn't Bell participate in the All-Star game or All-Star game festivities either last year or this year?
Yeah, and another catcher the Guardians added is Zach Collins. Zach Collins was was he drafted by the White Sox? He was the White Sox 10th overall pick in 2016. He played for the
that was a great pickup.
The Guardians picked him up as a backup. So the Guardians have Zunino, Zach Collins, who I really like coming out of Miami, Florida, as their backup, and Bo Naylor, the younger brother to Josh Naylor, is the 3rd string catcher. He hit 20 home runs in AA and AAA last year, and he's got that extra year to develop with those 2 catchers. So Cleveland's catcher room is actually surprisingly better. The depth is much better compared to
last year. Here's the thing. Everybody's saying right now that the free agent signings were amazing for their hitting. But here's the thing. There's a reason these guys are backups. Is because they have great power, they strike out a lot.
Yeah.
So this is really a pinch hitting situation. If you need a pinch hitting power hitter to come in and say you need a big time hit, you don't give him a lot of that bat because he's going to strike out a lot. But you give him enough at bats where he can display his power. He can get you 20 to 30 home runs on 200 at bats, 300 at bats. He got power.
Yeah.
Okay. You just don't want to give him too much because he does strike out a massive amount. I think he was like second or third in the MLB in strikeouts last year or something like that, but he was also like fifth in home runs. I mean, it was astonishing. It was almost a home run or a strikeout. It was an astonishing number.
Yeah, and
But
I'm going to break down the
I
NL
think it's a
quickly,
great.
and then
I
I'm going
think
to
it's a
get
great.
to. Then we're going to get to NFL and March Madness the rest of the show. But I'm going to break down my top 6 for the NL. Coming in at number 6 is an NL East team. I have the Phillies finishing 7th, missing the playoffs. I have the World Series runner-up Phillies missing the playoffs. It's kind of surprising because I told you before the show, every World Series runner-up got the number 1 seed the following year. That's a pretty amazing statistic. So
yeah.
The Phillies are going to break that trend. You're crazy, Chris. Well,
and
the team I picked ahead of the Phillies is the
Phillies
Miami Marlins. And Joey can tell you something about the Marlins as someone who lives in Jacksonville with their AAA team. But Marlins have 2 really good starters in Sandy Alcantara and Jesus Luzardo. 2 really good starters who both have ERAs of under 3.9. Now, the Marlins picked up a free agent this year, a veteran, but, a veteran who might have a comeback year. And the veteran they picked up is Johnny Cueto. Back in the day, Johnny Cueto was an ace for the Reds and the Royals, but he's number 3 pitcher in this rotation. And the number 4 pitcher in the Marlins rotation, Trevor Rogers, had a 3.99 ERA. And Max Meyer, the Marlins' 3rd overall pick in the 2020 MLB draft, started 2 games before having Tommy John surgery. So if Max Meyer comes back and solidifies that number 5 starter role, assuming Eduardo Cabrera from the Dominican Republic can't solidify that role, the Marlins could be a dangerous under-the-radar team with that rotation because Alcantara and Luzardo both almost made the All-Star game. Cueto's your number 3. Your number 4 starter has an ERA of under 4, and Max Meyer was drafted 3rd overall out of Minnesota. He had the best changeup in the 2020 MLB draft, as well as a really good curveball. So he comes back from Tommy John surgery. Who says the Marlins can't get that last playoff spot from the Phillies? I think a lot of people are sleeping on the Marlins this year, Joey. So I gave him the wild card over the Phillies. As chaotic as that sounds, my gut is telling me the Marlins are going to be a surprise team this year.
And as I do want to emphasize, along with the Cubs and the Guardians, the Marlins are probably the best team in baseball at drafting pitchers. Last year, the Jumbo Shrimp had 3 guys that are expected to be called up to the majors this year. Okay, 3 starters that were going to be called up to the majors.
Who was drafted 3rd overall, I believe.
Okay, the Jumbo Shrimp have a hella pitching rotation, and they regurgitate these guys, great pitchers, every year. Okay, the Marlins
2020 MLB draft, the Marlins dominated that draft. They got pitchers in every round of that 5-round draft during COVID, and they got really good value in each round.
And the Marlins are amazing at drafting pitchers, have been for the last 5 years or so. And every year we're talking about, around town, it's like, they got great pitchers, they got great pitchers, they got great pitchers. New pitchers go up, new pitchers come in, and it's like, they got great pitchers, they got great pitchers, they got great pitchers. So the Marlins, as far as pitching goes, I know I praise the Guardians and the Cubs, but the Marlins may have the best farm system as far as pitchers go in the major leagues. Like, I wouldn't put it past them because they have an amazing ability to draft pitchers.
And
they've got great coaches here in Jacksonville. The Jumbo Shrimp.
Extremely consistent too. The worst pitcher on the Marlins bullpen has a 4.11 ERA. There is not a single pitcher on the Marlins with an ERA above 4.12 in the entire bullpen. And they made some moves this year in free agency. Last year, the Marlins got Jorge Soler from the World Series Braves as a free agent. This year, Marlins went after Luis Arias at second baseman and Phillies third baseman John Segura. So they made a few moves. Not massive moves, but moves that are just big enough to grab your attention. And their bullpen is really consistent, and they went after 3 bullpen guys: Matt Barnes, AJ Puck, and JT Sargios. And Barnes and Puck were both first-round picks coming out of the MLB draft, both college pitchers. Puck pitched at Florida, Barnes pitched at Connecticut, and was drafted by the Red Sox. Puck was drafted by the Athletics, but his career hasn't panned out with Oakland, so the Marlins are gambling on him as a bullpen pitcher. The Athletics drafted Puck and starter. Maybe he works out in the bullpen. Maybe he has a resurgence with that chip on his shoulder. I mean, the Marlins.
Yeah,
I feel like the Marlins are a sleeper.
Here's an example.
It's going to sound crazy, but
here is
telling me they might be a sleeper.
It's not. It's like I'm going to give you an example here. One of the best relief pitchers of my youth was actually, before he had Tommy John surgery, one of the best starting pitchers in Major League Baseball. Now it's Kerry Wood. But he couldn't carry the load anymore after surgery as a starter. So they moved him into a closer's role. And he ended up being one of the best closers in Major League Baseball for the next 8-10 years. Because he was able to get his velocity on that short, just a short-term thing. Because a lot of people don't realize, before his injury, he was throwing at about 105 miles an hour, 102 to 105 miles an hour. But as a closer, he was able to do that for an inning at a time. He didn't have to do it for 9 innings at a time or 7 innings at a time or whatever like he did before. So that really did help his game. So maybe this is what's going to happen here. In this situation, you move him to a bullpen role, and he comes out, doesn't have to pitch as many innings, and he's able to get that velocity. He's able to do what he was doing before the unfortunate circumstances that derailed his career. But do you think that would be, based on what you know about him, does that sound like a feasible
yeah, I mean,
process,
that's realistic.
based on what you know?
Yeah. And at number 5, I put the Dodgers. For the first time in maybe 10 years, the Dodgers have 4 good starting pitchers, but they don't have that 5th starter to round out the rotation, because that's one of the reasons why the Dodgers were so dominant for many years. And a lot of players in the Dodgers got injured last year. 2 of their Kershaw and another starter both got injured last year. Scherzer had to carry the load. And you could tell the Dodgers, despite getting the 1 seed or 2 seed, they were overwhelmed by the time they got to the playoffs, because I think the Braves lost the Phillies, who were the 6 seed, and the Padres were the 5 seed, and I think they lost the Dodgers. So, I mean, the Padres were the 5 seed, and they beat the Dodgers in LA, who had the 1 seed that year. So the Dodgers, while they are amazing at reloading with batters, if the injury bug hits them like it did last year, we could very easily be looking at 4 NL East teams, the Braves, Mets, Marlins, and Phillies, with the Dodgers on the outside. And many Dodgers fans are going to argue Fernando Tatis is still serving his suspension. And that's true, but the Padres made it to the NLCS without their best batter, who got a 15-year contract before getting busted for steroids. That should tell you something. They went into your stadium and knocked your ass out of the playoffs without their best batter. That should say something. That tells me something. So I put the Dodgers at 5. I've got the Mets at 4 and the Braves at 3. I put the Cardinals at 2 because the Cardinals have Adam Wainwright, and every other pitcher besides Adam Wainwright in that rotation has a lower ERA than Wainwright. So I think the Cardinals dominate the NL Central, and they lock up a top 2 seed. And they push the Padres for that number 1 seed. And I've got the Padres at number 1 this year. I think the Padres are going to surprise a lot of people. They went after Juan Soto. They got that closer from the Brewers. And I think the Padres, they're pissed off about losing the NLCS, the Phillies, with home field in that NLCS. I think they're on a mission this year. And once Davis comes back from his suspension, I think they're going to put everything together. I mean, it's tough to say right now because the Braves have four of the Braves' top 5 starting pitchers have ERAs of under 4. And the reason the Braves didn't repeat is because Freddie Freeman left and they had injuries in the starting rotation. But if the Braves starting rotation stays healthy, who's to say they can't get back to a second World Series? I'm not saying they win it, but I definitely think they have enough talent to win the NL pennant. And I'm not ruling out the Dodgers. It's just age caught up with Kershaw and a lot of these veterans. Scherzer's in his 30s as well. I mean, the Dodgers' youngest pitcher had a season-ending injury, so he came back before the playoffs. But I just feel like Dodgers are still going to be a playoff team, but instead of being that NL West powerhouse, they're going to take a step back and end up as a wild card this year. Because I just feel like the Padres are hungrier after losing the NLCS to Phillies with home field in that series. So, I mean, we'll see. But I think the NL is kind of exciting. I mean, because I couldn't decide between honestly, I picked the Dodgers at 5 because their rotation was the most consistent of the remaining 3 teams between the Marlins and Phillies. But I mean, the Mets are good as well. The Mets, they lost Jake DeGrom, but they still have some really good pitchers in that rotation. So, I mean, and their worst starting pitcher in terms of ERA is Carlos Carrasco, and he's the number 4 starter in this rotation. He's still pretty good, and they got Verlander to pair with So, and they still have a lot of their starters from last year's team. So it's not like the Mets are going to be pushovers either. I think the NL, for the first time in years, I would say there's about 6 teams with good starting rotations, quality bats, and there's parity. And I like that. But at the same token, I think the Blue Jays and the Phillies are the 2 teams that made the playoffs that I think miss. Those are my predictions. You'll get my winners for each playoff series next week before opening week, because we got a lot of NFL free agency and NBA free and March Madness.
The Mets,
what do you want to add before we get to the news that people actually care about?
Well, the Mets, I do want to put about the Mets is that they are consistently right now, over the last few years, the best team that they've had since Strawberry and Dwight Gooden back in the 80s. Okay, so don't sleep on them because they will bite you. They may not have that fit starter, but they're still darn good, and they will still bite you.
And I'll quickly pull up the Mets rotation here because I went through every depth chart on Fangraphs. So I'll quickly pull up the Mets here because the Mets rotation, you have Verlander and Scherzer as the 1 and 2. And last year the Padres added Scherzer from the Dodgers to pair with DeGrom, but DeGrom kept getting injured. So this year, and Verlander and Scherzer were teammates in Detroit, and they were teammates in Houston, I believe. And maybe they weren't teammates in Houston, but I think they were teammates in Detroit. And then they ended up pitching against each other in the 2019 World Series, where Scherzer got his first ring. And now they're teammates again for the first time since Detroit. That team chemistry. The Mets also got a Japanese pitcher, Kodai Senga, who has a 3.6 ERA in the Japanese Baseball League, and he's going to be the number 3 starter. So while everyone's talking about Verlander, Scherzer, and Cookie Carrasco, the Mets went out and got a pitcher in the Japanese Baseball League that's pretty good. And their number 5 starter, David Peterson, was their 2017 first-round pick. So that Mets starting rotation is nothing to sneeze at. And Pete Alonso's won a few home run derbies. So and they got Lindor too. So they had a 12.5 game lead over the 10.5 game lead over the Braves at one point before Atlanta rallied back. So they're not a team to dismiss. I mean, I know they lost in the wild card round last year, but they're not a team to look past. They are talented. If you dismiss the Mets, they will come back and fuck you up.
Exactly. Couldn't agree more.
And the only pitcher that's injured for the Mets at the moment is Jose Quintana. he's their substitute starter, but Quintana was on the Cardinals last year, and he had bone graft surgery 2 days ago on March 16th. So I don't know how long Quintana's going to be out. Edwin Diaz, one of the Mets relievers, is dealing. He had knee surgery on March 16th, and Edwin Diaz was the Mets closer when they made the 2015 World Series. So that is something to keep an eye on. And then they traded for Diaz from the Mariners in 2018 and got him back. So, I mean, those are some interesting storylines. I'm not going to dive super in depth with this, but I mean, you could make an argument of the 12 teams I mentioned, plus you add last year's playoff teams, Toronto and Philly, to that mix. That's 14 teams of the 30 that could win the World Series. I'm not going to acknowledge the other 16 teams. I think we can agree they're both rebuilt. They're all rebuilding still at the moment, trying to get more players in their farm system. And there's just too many teams. Even as someone who studies depth charts as extensively as me, I have enough common sense to know when to refrain from acknowledging a certain team, because baseball, it's a fun sport to research, but it is a lot harder to predict than football. And it's too detail oriented. Whereas football, it's casual, it's fun. There's 17, 16 weeks, and it's detail oriented, but it's just long enough without overdoing it. But let's transition. It's 10:42. We got to talk about some more March Madness, some more free agency. I'm going to do a quick rundown of each division. We'll start with your favorite division, the AFC North. Ravens haven't done anything yet because they're waiting on Lamar Jackson. Ben Powers is gone. He signed with Denver, and we'll get to Denver later. But Calais Campbell, I think he got released from the team. There are reports he might retire. I don't know if he's going to sign with anyone else at the moment, but they traded Chuck Clark to the Jets for a 7th-round pick. So that is
let's face it, the Ravens are rebuilding. The Ravens are rebuilding.
All the free agency moves imply they're rebuilding, even though they've drafted some good players in 2022 and 2021 and 2020 that have high potential. They haven't re-signed anyone. They haven't moved for anyone in free agency, and they're sort of just waiting on Lamar Jackson. They want to know if they've got a commitment from Lamar, or whether Lamar's given an ultimatum. Trade me, pay me, or trade me. Lamar hasn't given them an ultimatum yet.
Did you not see the tweet? Did you not see the tweet? Lamar has started negotiating publicly, and you know the Ravens don't do that thing. They don't do that stuff. He tweeted out the offer from the Ravens. 3 years, $133 million guaranteed. Okay? Once that happened, that tells me the Ravens are going to be done with that. They do not do that as an organization. Might not like the Ravens, but I respect the Ravens as an organization and how professional they are. And this tells me Lamar may have stepped over the line. And the only problem is, according to Jason Lloyd of The Athletic, nobody's willing to make Lamar an offer. Which means Lamar may have just put himself in limbo
on their rookie deals. And it's not that they don't want Lamar Jackson. They just don't want to have to mortgage the assets necessary to obtain Lamar services.
Well, not only that, but look at Lamar Jackson's history. Lamar he won the MVP. He really has not had a good season since he won the MVP.
And to be fair,
so
Lamar's durability is also a question mark, because last year everyone was saying Ronnie Stanley, 2 consecutive season-ending injuries. He has to stay healthy this year or else. And once Ronnie Stanley came back from his injury, he was pretty good the rest of the way. But Lamar Jackson, on the other hand, 2nd consecutive year with a season-ending injury, I think teams aren't opposed to paying Lamar $40 million, but they want to see him play a full 17-game season. They want a little bit more sample size before they make the move. And the Ravens can franchise tag Lamar for 2 years. This would be the first of 2 years they franchise tag him if nobody makes him an offer, because they use the non-exclusive franchise tag. But if nobody makes Lamar an offer, the Ravens get him back on the franchise tag. The franchise tag would be applied if nobody made Lamar an offer, and they would get one more year of
And
Lamar.
Lamar does.
So this might be a trial year for
He
Lamar.
does not want
2023
anything to
might
do with
be a
that.
trial year for Lamar Jackson. That's all we're saying.
And he wants nothing to do with that. He wants a contract fully guaranteed.
Yeah, because he
That's
still
why
wants
people
to get
say
paid after being suspended for 2 years, and that freaking infuriates Lamar Jackson because he won an MVP. He feels disrespected. The thing is, he won the MVP during his sophomore year when he had a healthy Orlando Brown and a healthy Ronnie Stanley. That is getting downplayed. And to be fair, I mean, in Lamar's defense, his only weapon that year was Mark Andrews. And, I mean, he had some low-end receivers, and he put everything together. Great offensive line. All on rookie deals, I think. I think Ronnie Stanley was still on his rookie deal. So was Ben Powers. A lot of the guys from that Ravens. And I think the right guard was still. The Ravens had a veteran right guard before acquiring Kevin Zeitler, who retired. A really good veteran right guard. He was like one of the better right guards in the NFL. I forget his name, but I think he retired after Lamar's MVP season. But yeah, let's talk about the other three AFC North teams because you've got the Bengals who have made, and the Steelers and the Browns. Pittsburgh's made some decent moves. They replaced Cameron Sutton with Patrick Peterson. I mean, Patrick Peterson, he's not as fast as Cameron Sutton, but Sutton wanted a little bit more money than what the Steelers were willing to give. And Steelers were like, we're just going to sign Peterson to save some cap space. And so they replace. We'll get to the Ohio teams. I know they're your favorite, but I want to get the Steelers out of the way because, I mean, I live in Pittsburgh and I know that the Steelers are replacing Cameron Sutton, their only corner who finished in the top 30 on Pro Football Focus, with Patrick Peterson, who had a good year, but Sutton played much tougher competition in the AFC North, whereas Peterson only played one number one receiver in that division, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Amon-Ra was injured in week 3. So Peterson only had to face Amon-Ra St. Brown once this entire year. He didn't have to face Devontae Adams, and when he played the Bears a second time, Darnell Mooney was already on season-ending IR. And the first time he played the Bears, they didn't even have Claypool at the time. So I think those little details matter to a certain degree. I'm not saying they matter exponentially, but those little details matter to a slight degree, Joe. You get what I'm saying? And I think a lot of people are overlooking.
I do. And
he had a good year. Don't get me wrong. Stayed healthy as number one corner. He had a rebound year, but the competition in the NFC North at wide receiver wasn't quite the greatest last year. Outside of St. Brown, there really wasn't a number one receiver in that division. That's my argument. Maybe you disagree with me, but
Cincinnati had 3 number one receivers, but we gotta. I think in this discussion we have
the Browns have a number one receiver in Amari Cooper, and maybe Rashad Bateman puts everything together in year 3. Maybe the Ravens draft another receiver and he breaks out.
Maybe do.
But regardless, those are a few scenarios I'm throwing out.
With Bateman, and what the problem with Bateman is injuries. I mean, he hasn't, that was the big thing coming out of college. And
year. Rough rookie year, season-ending injury in year 2. Okay? So that's the big thing with Bateman. I mean, can he stay healthy? And Duvernay, the number 2 receiver, also suffered a season-ending injury. That's why I can't really criticize a mock draft for giving the Ravens a wide receiver in round 1, because you don't want to be in that situation again where your number 1 and number 2 go down and Lamar basically takes off and runs, and that's his default response, because in that situation, that's probably going to be his default response, even with a good offensive line. That might be why some of these teams are shying away from Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, because I was watching a comedy skit, of NFL quarterbacks, and something really rang true when they said they talked about Kyler Murray and how small he was, and then they're talking about, the small quarterback is like, you're one hit away from having a charity football event named after you. How much longer can Lamar? Because there are rumors going around that Watson's contract was largely dependent to get Lamar out of the AFC North because they knew Lamar would do something like this. And now other teams are looking saying, we aren't paying you that much, Lamar. How much of that is depicted on Lamar's style of playing? Like, he may be one hit away from having a football memorial tournament named after him. Because, or at least a game, because he might get knocked the crap out. You know, and that might be it.
Still the nickel
because
corner.
of his style of play.
Levi Wallace was the number one, because Pittsburgh had Levi Wallace and Cameron Sutton rotate at number one and number two corner. And even though Cameron Sutton was the number two corner, he still finished in the top 50 in Pro Football Focus among corners, whereas Levi Wallace, I think, was 51 out of 81 corners or something. I don't have the exact stat in front of me. But I think Sutton was the only corner of that trio to finish in the top 30 on Pro Football Focus. And you replace him with Patrick Peterson. And I feel like the Steelers downgraded at linebacker too, Joe. Here's what the Steelers did at linebacker. They cut Miles Jack to save cap space. They let Spillane walk. They let Devin Bush walk. And their two additions are Cole Holcomb, who played in a 43 defense his entire career, and former Patriots linebacker Landon Roberts, who struggled with Miami. So, I mean, Landon Roberts was a decent stopgap, I guess, but Jerome Baker was the best linebacker on Miami when healthy. And Miami drafted Channing Tindall out of Georgia, I believe, so I think Tindall's ready to start next year. And Pittsburgh basically replaced Miles Jack, Devin Bush, and Spillane with Cole Holcomb and Landon Roberts. And while Holcomb's effective, he's not a star player. And I feel like Pittsburgh, you can make an argument that Pittsburgh actually downgraded an inside linebacker. Maybe you disagree with me there, but that's how I feel when looking at the roster. Like, Jack is a player who commands respect. Holcomb's a tackling machine. He's a nice guy. He's an effective leader, captain. But I don't see a guy who's a star. But he's an effective leader, and he was a captain on the Commanders last year.
I agree, and I will agree that Miles Jack was not only a leader in this sense, but he's still playing at a high level. Here in Jacksonville, we're saying, why the hell do you even get rid of him? He's still playing at an extremely high level. There is no reason to get rid of him.
I mean, there was no reason to get rid of Miles Jack.
Same thing I say.
He's your best linebacker. Spillane and Devin Bush are both expendable. I'm not arguing that. They are, but instead of keeping one really good linebacker and trying to get a above average to good linebacker to complement Miles Jack, which is what a smart NFL GM does, Pittsburgh decides to release their best inside linebacker to save cap space so they can keep their safety tandem of Edmonds and Fitzpatrick and then keep their cornerback group intact, keep their edge rushers intact. And unless you can extend Highsmith, there's really no reason to justify this because Highsmith's in a contract year. You bring back Ogunjobi, and Ogunjobi's good, but if we're ranking the Steelers' defensive players, Watt and Fitzpatrick would be 1 and 2. Hayward would be 3. Those are the untradables. These guys, those are the Steelers for life. That's the Steelers for life on the Steelers defense. And then the fourth best player on that defense, you can make an argument for Highsmith after his breakout season, and you can make an argument for Miles Jack. And then there's everybody else. Maybe Sutton. Sutton would be in that second tier as well. And then there's everybody else. We probably agree on this as far as the Steelers go. That's the sad thing.
Yeah.
We both dislike the Steelers, and we're in complete agreement on this.
And how dumb will the Steelers look if Miles Jack signs with Cleveland or Cincinnati? How dumb will they look at that point that they let a guy
Cincinnati is
who
going to
can
keep
still
their front
go
seven
and
as
is a
is because
leader?
they already gave Jermaine Pratt
Yeah,
a 3-year,
yeah.
$21 million extension. So they have their front seven taken care of.
Well,
They gave Nick
yeah,
Scott a team-friendly
I
deal.
agree.
And Nick Scott was the strong safety for the Rams in their Super Bowl win over the Bengals. So he'll play strong safety. Daxton Hill will play his natural free safety position instead of nickel corner. And you'll have a cornerback trio of Awuzie, Cam Taylor-Britt replacing Eli Apple, and Mike Hilton. We never got to see what Taylor-Britt could do with Awuzie. That's the scary thing, Joey. Taylor-Britt came in and replaced Awuzie once he tore his ACL. Is there not as much? You need to add more quarterback in case Awuzie gets injured again in a contract year. At the same token, if this defense stays healthy, there might not be a drop-off in play if Nick Scott and Daxton Hill can step up for the Bengals. There might not be a drop-off in the defense at all because the entire defensive line is back. Logan Wilson is back. Jermaine Pratt is back. And Akeem Davis-Gaither and Marcus Daly are both in line last year of their rookie deals. So I really don't see a drop-off in the Bengals front seven at all, if I'm being completely honest with you, Joey.
Well, I agree in principle to that, but I also look at it as the Bengals are trying to get back to the Super Bowl. Some of these other teams we'll talk about later are gearing up big time. Okay? So for me, I'm looking and saying, hey, if Miles Jack's willing to go to the Bengals on a team-friendly deal to win a Super Bowl, who's stopping him? The Browns are only one linebacker away from completely retooling their defense. What if he gets it? So how dumb will the Steelers look in this sense about saying how dumb the Steelers would look? How dumb would the Steelers look if one of those two teams, their rivals, got their star middle linebacker, who may be older, but it's one of the best leaders in the NFL at the linebacker position, simply because they're like, we want to save cap space. How dumb will they look to let that happen and go within the division? They'd look pretty freaking stupid, wouldn't they?
Agreed. And you look at the Bengals, they added Orlando Brown from the Chiefs as their new left tackle. Jonah Williams wants a trade, but it's like, Jonah, if you just bit the bullet and showed teams you could play right tackle or left guard as well, and you bring Lael Collins back, you guys are the undisputed favorite to win the Super Bowl. Because the AFC is pretty tight right now. You have the Bengals are a tight end away from completing their depth chart on offense and defense, like their starters. The Bills are a middle linebacker replacing Tremaine Edmonds away from completing their depth chart. And the Jaguars are a nickel corner away from having quality starters on both sides of the ball. I mean, it's that freaking tight in the AFC right now. And the Chiefs lost an abundance of talent free agency so far. And the Chargers are going to have Rashawn Slater back. They re-signed Trey Pipkins. They cut Filer to save cap space. And they're going to move Sal Ear over to left guard. So, I mean, I would argue the Chargers might be in better position than the Chiefs if they could stay healthy and don't Charger next season. I mean,
and also don't forget about what the Dolphins have been doing.
And it's like, I honestly think right now, I think the Chiefs could still get wild card one, but if I were ranking these teams right now, I would put Bills, Jaguars, Bengals, Jaguars would be the top three. I'd put the Chargers at 4. I would put the Chiefs, and then I'm sort of debating between the Chiefs, depending on what they do in free agency in the draft, the Jets, if they get Aaron Rodgers, the Steelers, and the Browns. I'm looking at those 4 teams and deciding which of these 3 you're going to get the wild cards. That's pretty much my thought process. It's pretty simple and to the point. I mean, that's not my type of style. I'm a pretty detail-oriented guy, but that's pretty much where my thought process is right now. And I'm pretty sure your thought process is at least somewhat similar to that point. Maybe not identical, but similar. Okay, Nick Scott was 78 out of 88 safeties on Pro Football Focus. Okay, and you're replacing Mike Hilton with him. I can see why you'd be concerned with that move as a Bengals fan. I agree. You probably do need to get another safety in the draft to at least challenge him. Maybe you don't start that guy year one, but you bring him in. And Nick Scott was great as a run stuffer, 88 tackles. And he was 12th among safeties in run stuffing, but he was 78th among safeties in coverage, 78th among 88 safeties. So he was a bottom 10, bottom 11 safety in coverage, yet he was a top 12 safety in run support. So you can use him in run situations, but yeah, I think you should get another strong safety. A guy like Brandon Joseph or J.L. Skinner would be an ideal fit for the Bengals if they wanted to go that route. Not saying Nick Scott can't be the man. I just haven't seen enough to say, yeah, that's a surefire long-term fit. And that's what's going to be interesting.
Okay, my phone hung up on me for some reason that I do not understand. So, which team is it that you're talking about?
I'm the Bengals. I'm still talking about the Bengals, but Nick Scott
Okay.
was a top 12
Okay.
run stuffing safety, but a bottom 11 coverage safety. But because I read an article on Twitter, I read a tweet saying that Nick Scott, 88 tackles, was one of the top 15 run stuffing safeties, but he was bottom 11 in coverage in Pro Football Focus last year. And they left that detail out in the tweet. I think that's pretty. I might be a Bengals fan, I don't know, but like I think that's a pretty big detail to leave out when selling a player, especially a player that's going to replace Mike Hilton or Von Bell, not Mike Hilton. Mike Hilton's still a Bengal, Von Bell. But that's a pretty big detail to leave out.
And well, here's the bigger detail: is that the Bengals may very well lose. They've already lost Jesse Bates to the Falcons. Now they may also lose Von Bell.
Von Bell signed with the Panthers, in case you.
Von Bell's with the Panthers.
So Von Bell.
Yeah, okay. So I didn't hear they signed with the Panthers
next year. You're going to have Von Bell at strong safety and Chin at free safety in a contract year. That's going to be a deadly freaking tandem, especially if
that's going to be a great tandem.
Are healthy next year. If Horn and Jackson are healthy with that safety tandem,
yeah.
Carolina is going to be a nightmare to throw on, literally.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is huge because the Bengals lost their two of the best safeties in the NFL. They had probably the best safety tandem in the NFL, arguably.
I do like.
And now one's on Atlanta, one's in Carolina.
At the same token, it's not going to be easy for him to replace a Pro Bowl safety like Jesse Bates, who everybody knows
is a
star. And I like Daxton Hill coming out of Michigan. I've even mocked him to the Bengals last year. Bale and I were the only people in the country who mocked him to the Bengals.
Oh, yeah.
But he did have some rookie struggles. He had some growing pains, and now he's got to bury that and take the next step in year 2. And maybe he doesn't take that next step until year 3. But he's going to have to take that next step this year now because you just lost your 2 safeties. So.
Yeah, and we both like Daxton Hill, but I don't think this is a heck of a spot to put him into because you're one half of a tandem that's replacing probably one of the best safety tandems in the NFL over the last 3 or 4 years. That is not an easy thing to throw a second-year guy into, whether you like him or not. That's a tough situation. And the Bengals, I think the Bengals are definitely going to be hurt from this. The Atlanta Falcons are going to be much better in their secondary. The Panthers are going to be much better in their secondary. The Bengals are going to be hurting a little bit.
I mean, if Louisiana and Cambritt Taylor are healthy, the cornerbacks might be able to make up for some of the missed coverage assignments by the safeties. At the same token,
well, I do want to say the missed coverage assignment thing. We thought the same thing about the Browns last year on the safeties missed coverages, and we saw how that went.
Yeah.
We're going 60 yards a shot.
I want to talk about the Bengals offensive line really quickly before we get to your Browns, Joey. Okay, so the Bengals, Orlando Brown got a 4-year contract. Less money than what he got had he accepted with the Chiefs, but Bengals said they would keep him at left tackle, so he got $16 million for 4 years, $64 million, and he was the only player on the Bengals offensive line in the top 20 among any of their offensive linemen in Pro Football Focus. That pissed off Jonah Williams, who now wants a trade because Jonah Williams doesn't want to move from left tackle. Jonah Williams had he had a solid second year during Joe Burrow's rookie year when he was injured, and then he did good in his third year, and you were thinking, if we could put together one more strong year, I wouldn't be opposed to extending him. You give him the fifth-year tender, but give me one more dominant year, and I will extend you. And instead, he had another setback year. He finished both Jonah Williams and Lael Collins were in the below 60th among 81 offensive tackles on PFF. Cordell Volston was in the 65 range, and the Bengals center, former Patriot, it was 15th among 36 centers. So Ted Karras was a middle-of-the-pack center in 2022, 15th among 36 centers. Good enough to keep his job, but not necessarily that star center you can depend on. So,
yeah, and to put a little bit of light on that, Ethan Pocic was number 12. So he was beneath a backup center that emerged when he was the starter from week 1. So just to put that in a little bit of perspective.
Yeah. And the thing is, if Jonah Williams moved to right tackle or inside the left guard and they kept Collins and all those guys stay healthy, I don't think there's a single team in the AFC that, maybe the Bills, and the Bengals still beat the crap out of the Bills in Buffalo without 3 starters on their offensive line. You add Orlando Brown, a healthy Jonah Williams, a healthy Alex Kappa, and you move Collins inside to guard, Bengals might beat the Bills by 20 or 30 points if you put it into hindsight, Joey. I mean, I know that's a very disrespectful thing to say to Bills Mafia, but this argument does sort of have some credence here, considering the Bengals beat the Bills 27-10 without 3 starters in their offensive line. You add Brown and those other 3 starters, you're talking about the Bengals maybe beating the Bills by 3 touchdowns.
Well, did they sign Orlando Brown?
Yes, he's a Bengal. That is official.
They did?
Yep. He is now Joe Burrow's blind
I had not heard that yet. That is, well, if I'm Jonah Williams, I do want to trade, but I don't want a trade. I don't want to push a trade because the value of my contract for a right tackle or for a left tackle may be the difference between a $10 to $12 million guarantee to a $20 million a year guarantee.
Jonah Williams is a bubble player right now, Joey, because Jonah Williams, season-ending injury as a rookie, 2 really good years. He had a year where he dealt with some growing pains in year 2 after Burrow suffered a season-ending injury. But in his defense, the rest of the Bengals' offensive line lacked stability outside of him. And then in year 3, he was the starter for every game during the Bengals' run to the Super Bowl. I'm not saying he's expendable, but he's on the chopping block this year. He has to do something if he wants that second contract with the Bengals. He has to. He has to have a big year.
So one huge issue with the Bengals that I saw last year was their right tackle. Now you're running Jonah Williams at right tackle and Orlando Brown at left tackle. You have a great bookend tackle group.
And you have Lael Collins. The Bengals' offensive line was great until Collins and Williams both suffered season-ending injuries. Because I think Collins got injured in week 16, Kappa got injured in week 17, and Williams got injured in the wild card win against the Ravens. So it's just those injuries ended up being what cost the Bengals a shot at the AFC title. Let's be real.
And absolutely, I agree. And guess what? And if you put that offensive line up there, I think that makes the Bengals
the undisputed favorite in the AFC.
Because if you put
Williams at right tackle,
absolutely.
Williams 61 among 81 offensive tackles on Pro Football Focus. Lael Collins was 68 among 81 offensive tackles. And the left guard, Cordell Volston, was like 55 among 65 65 guards, or 77 guards, 55. So you could kick Collins inside the left guard where Volston plays. You get Alex Capa back, who was in the top 20 among 60-something, 50-something guards, and then you have your center in Ted Karras, and that would be your offensive line. That is an offensive line that could win Joe Burrow a Super Bowl if all those guys can put their egos aside. Thing is, I don't think they can put their egos aside unless Joe Cool talks some sense into that group. Because you have
Joe Burrow, I have
Brown and Williams, who both want to be left tackles, and Brown proved he can be a left tackle when Ronnie Stanley had durability issues.
Brown has
Jonah Williams still has those durability issues. They're not as severe as Stanley's were, but they are concerning to a degree. And
the when it comes to, if you're Jonah Williams, you say, okay, Orlando Brown.
Might be your only opportunity to get a Super Bowl ring. It's the last year of your rookie deal, and if you get the Super Bowl ring, then you get your ring. Now you can get your money and do whatever the fuck you want after that.
Exactly. So I'm really interested in how they're going to look at this. And Jonah Williams has got to put his ego aside, because it's not like he's being cast aside for a scrub. He's being cast aside by what I called for years Hercules, because the son of Zeus, Orlando Brown Jr., one of the strongest, toughest, best left tackles in football. Okay? You're not being pressed aside for a scrub. This is one of those instances where you say, okay, normally I would be upset, but can I really be upset that we just got Orlando Brown?
No,
it's
and
like,
here's the thing.
That's one of those things where you're originally pissed.
I've gone through the depth charts of every team in the league, and when you look at all the contracts, there's maybe 3 teams that would trade for Jonah Williams. The Rams, the Bears, and the Titans, because the Titans are probably going to draft the first left tackle 11. Maybe the Patriots. But I think the Patriots are looking at Peter Skoronski, Broderick Jones, Paris Johnson. They're looking at one of those guys and maybe moving Trent Brown back to right tackle.
Chris, that's 3 more teams willing to trade for Lamar Jackson. Because nobody's trading for Lamar Jackson, so Williams has 3 teams over him.
There's 4 teams that could use left tackle upgrades, and those are the 4 I would argue. The Titans, the Patriots, the Bears, if they think there's someone better than Braxton Miller, who's still on a rookie deal as a 5th-round pick, and the Rams, because the Rams lost Joseph Noteboom to a season-ending injury, and he's the guy who took over for Whitworth. Whitworth was amazing. And Noteboom had a few good games when Whitworth was injured during the Rams Super Bowl run. But you could argue the Rams overpaid him. You could definitively argue that. So I would say those 4 teams, maybe you throw in the Commanders, because Tracy Porter did draft Cody Mock as a left tackle at 16. So maybe we throw in the Commanders for fun. I mean, that's it. That's really all the teams that would be in the market for his services as a left tackle. And are any of those teams willing to give the Bengals a day 2 pick to get Jonah Williams? Probably not. Belichick's thinking, maybe if I give the Bengals a 4th and a 6th, I can poach Jonah Williams from those dumbasses in Cincinnati. The Bengals are like, man, fuck you, Belichick. You going to give us that we're on to Cincinnati bullshit? Fuck you. We're not giving you Jonah Williams. That's probably what the Bengals front office is thinking.
Well, this is the first time when the Bengals have a great front office and a confident coach. Before, they had a really good coach and a shit front office. And before that, they had shit all the way around.
Well, the
So they
Bengals don't
finally
really
got
have
it
a
right.
front office.
So
Their
I don't
director
think-
of player personnel is the GM for the team. So the owner pretty much tells the director of player personnel what to do, and he just carries out the owner's orders, but he has control of the final say on the
But at the same time, the player personnel director, like you said, is basically the general manager.
And he chose Jamar Chase
even if the
over
owner
Penei
said
Sewell,
something-
a pick that was criticized and memed to hell and back on Twitter because a lot of people thought the Bengals should pick Sewell.
And he made a pretty good job.
They got that right.
So when
Joe
do they
Burrow
actually
and
go?
Chase, they were teammates at LSU. The Bengals got that shit right. So you can't really.
And that tells me
the benefit of the doubt, Joey. They have. That's the reality.
And I'm wondering when he's actually going to be given a promotion, and given the GM spot legitimately, because he's done a fantastic job. The entire situation I'm looking at is that the Bengals. Let's be honest.
Offensive
The
line
Chiefs
put their
barely-
egos
the
aside,
Chiefs-
and the Bengals can get
2
a
years
tight
ago-
end. Maybe either any of these 4 tight ends. If you get Mayer, Washington, Kincaid, or Musgrave in the first round, you get any of those 4, and all of these offensive linemen put their fucking egos aside and decide to stay in Cincinnati 1 more year for Burrow, they are the undisputed favorite in the AFC. Period.
Well, Chris, I want to put it to you this way. In 2021, I think it was, the Chiefs barely got past the Browns, and then barely, I'm talking literally less than a millisecond,
We like to brag about
got to
how
Burrow
the
on a
Browns
sack. But
were the Chiefs' toughest competition, but they
Chris,
didn't even make the AFC
Chris,
title game. But in your defense, the Browns did better
I'm making a
and the
point,
Buccaneers
Chris.
whooped the Chiefs' ass.
I'm making a point. I'm making a point. And then they barely got to Burrow. I'm like, if you, I think you're the one that sent me the still. Chase not only beat his man, put his man on his ass. And if Burrow had less than, I'd say 0.1 second more to release that ball, the Bengals go to the Super Bowl the Bengals go to the Super Bowl on a last second, touchdown. Now, you put a Chiefs team that just lost their free safety, I have no doubt they'll retool in the draft. They do every year because they're the Chiefs. But they've lost their free safety. They're probably going to lose somebody else. If that situation happens again, well, they don't have a free safety that can get you a lot of knockdowns and several interceptions a year. And the Bengals offensive line puts their shit aside and works together for a Super Bowl. Joe Burrow has that half second, get rid of that ball.
Especially if you get another weapon in the first round. You get one of those tight ends to pair with Chase and Higgins. It's going to be impossible to double team any weapon on that. I'm not talking Chase. You double team Chase, it opens things up for Higgins and Boyd. You double team Higgins, it opens things up for Boyd. You run a 3 receiver, 1 tight end set. You try to double team anybody, it's going to create an opening for Burrow to exploit.
Well, because this is the thing we really kept talking about, was that really showed that the Chiefs, that season showed that the Chiefs are really vulnerable.
But it was because the offensive tackles. You're just acting like the Browns blew an opportunity to get to the AFC Championship because you couldn't beat Chad Henne. And in the AFC title game, both the left tackle Fisher and the right tackle Mitchell Schwartz both suffered season-ending injuries.
I'm just stating what happened.
You're stating what happened.
It doesn't matter how it happened. I'm just stating what happened.
From a Browns fan.
No, I'm just saying what happened, period.
The entirety of what happened to the Chiefs.
I'm just saying what happened. I'm saying what happened, period.
What happened
because
you're not looking at the other
it doesn't matter. The Chiefs won.
We'll get to the fucking Browns.
But they're set up
we got
a scenario
to cover. We're never going to get through this if we argue about shit. So why don't you tell us about the Browns?
Well, I'm not arguing. I'm just stating what happened in the and I'm saying what the Bengals' favor is. If the Bengals have that scenario again, will they win this year? If that scenario happens this year.
If they put their egos aside and draft a tight end, I think they are the team to beat, because right now the Bills don't have a replacement to Tremaine Edmonds. And Mark Suba's tweeting about how much this linebacker class sucks. That's like, I asked him, would you draft Trent Simpson at 28? He's like, no, get that shit out of here. No.
Really?
But, Mark thought Darnold was going to be a rock star and Josh Allen would be the worst QB in the draft. And the Bills ended up with the best QB in that draft. So, I'm just saying.
So I'm a little.
And Mark had a fourth round.
I'm not sure how I feel about
it. I'm not trying to be an asshole, but I love Mahomes, and Mark had a fourth round grade on him, so I kind of earned bragging rights there.
Yeah, and I love Simpson. I don't know what the hate's about, but
I think, and Simpson can play inside. I thought Simpson was a pure outside linebacker, but I posted his film cut against NC State on YouTube. He played inside and outside in that game, so I'm not opposed to picking him at 28. He's there. Just saying.
Yeah, so
I can see why Bills fans would think Pilato's a reach at 28 after his combine. I can see why they feel that way about Sewell, Andrew Sanders. But I'm not opposed to Simpson at 28, as crazy as it sounds. He might be the only guy that warrants being picked in the first round outside of Nolan Smith, linebacker. And Nolan Smith's a pure outside linebacker / edge rusher, whereas Simpson might be the only inside linebacker that even warrants a day one pick. So.
Yeah. So I'm not sure about that. Let's move on, though.
Let's get to your Browns. We got plenty of time. 7 other divisions we got to run through before 12:10 when the college basketball games start. Browns, they got Oklahoma.
I think the Browns are probably the easiest team. I do think the Browns are the easiest team to go over because they got one of the best defensive tackles and Delvin Tomlinson. They got Ronquo, which was ranked, I think, 6th overall in pass rush efficiency.
Yeah. Ronquo was good his first 2 years with the Rams, but then he got demoted to a backup edge rusher role, and he's sort of been that. So you have 2 stopgaps in Okoronkwo and Alex Wright. I think you have 2 backup defensive ends. I think you can get a better guy in the draft. But the other thing is, if the guy in the draft isn't ready to play week 1, you have your stopgaps. You have your competition. Best man wins. Pretty simple.
Well, Chris, Okoronkwo did get his chance to be a starter in Houston after week 6 or 7 and was one of the best overall pass rushers in the NFL. I think he had 30 quarterback pressures and 6 sacks over that time.
Out of Oklahoma.
He was ranked number 6 overall.
With the Rams, and he had 5 sacks.
He
had 32 tackles and 5 sacks with the Texans.
He had 5 sacks but 30 quarterback hurries.
Yeah.
So he was getting back there, which, considering what the Texans did last year, was not impressive. Kind of impressive for an individual.
Yeah, but he got 5 of those sacks in the all 5 of the sacks came in the final 6 games of the regular season. So they were garbage. Those were games where the Texans were essentially, they knew they were out of contention at that point. They wanted to give their young guys some experience.
They knew they were out of contention in week 2. They knew they were out of contention in week 2, Chris. Let's not sugarcoat this shit. The Texans knew they were out of it when the season started.
I think everybody knew they were going to be the worst AFC team in the league. Okay, everybody and their mother knew they were the single worst AFC team in the league this year.
Yeah, so let's not sugarcoat that one. The fact that they had anybody who kept playing.
The Juan Thornhill acquisition. I love the Dalvin Tomlinson acquisition, too. I told you, Joey, keep an eye on Dalvin Tomlinson. He's just cheap enough for the Browns to afford a one-term team-friendly deal with. And played with Stefanski in Minnesota. Keep an eye on that. They might get him. And they got Thornhill, who I think is a massive upgrade over Juan Thornhill was my number 1 safety in the 2019 draft. I think I had late first, early second
You
on
did.
Thornhill.
You had
I
a
apologize for hyping the fuck out of Thornhill because I absolutely loved him. I think he's an upgrade over John Johnson. I was not a John Johnson guy.
Oh yeah,
He was solid.
and 13 pass breakups, 3 interceptions. John Johnson was more a play to the line guy, and they had him playing a free safety for what the fuck ever reason that I do not know.
Juan Thornhill was a free safety at Virginia his entire college career, and he was a free safety with the Chiefs for his entirety of his rookie deal. So, and I thought he was a guy with borderline Pro Bowl potential coming out of Virginia. So maybe he's not that good, but he is an upgrade over John Johnson, and he's way better in zone coverage. I don't think I need to sugarcoat that.
Yeah, we're not going to sugarcoat it. There are people. I tuned into 92.3 The Fan for the first time in a year here a couple days ago. And the thing that baffled my mind, people were calling in saying, who is Thornhill? Who is Thornhill?
These guys are casual Browns fans that don't follow the NFL draft like we do. And I feel insulted that we have to roast these guys. But at the same token, I understand why you want to roast these guys.
Yeah, it's like Thornhill he was a guy you knew, I knew. Even though I got ticked off at the Chiefs as a Brown fan, I still looked at Thornhill and I'm like, this guy's pretty damn good. I didn't expect the Browns to sign him, especially for the team-friendly deals they did. But even I look at him like, this guy is an extremely good safety for the Chiefs, and I expected the Chiefs to re-sign him. They didn't. And so I cannot be upset with the Thornhill signing. It's essentially a 2-year, $14 million deal. But there is a 3-year, $21 million with $14 guaranteed.
I'm looking up my safety rankings for the 2019 draft. I archive all my draft rankings on my virtual draft board. So I'm looking up where I had each safety ranked. And my number one safety
I think Tomlinson was a 3-year deal, and Tomlinson was a 3-year deal, and Okonkwo was a 4-year deal, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And they were all really good team-friendly deals.
Apparently, because I'm looking at this, but I had Juan Thornhill at 58, and I had Jaquan Johnson, so I was way off on Jaquan Johnson, but I was spot on with my Juan Thornhill evaluation.
Yeah,
and my number 3 safety in that draft was Nasir Adderley. Now, he retired. He actually retired from football after this year. But Adderley had an amazing Senior Bowl that year. And
I think under the radar, because we know the Browns signed 2 defensive tackles. If they're basically rotational players. I think the under the radar player that signed last night is Akers, the Texans tight end, who caught the game-winning pass against Arizona, against Indianapolis, that literally gave the Bears.
He's not even the best tight end on that team in terms of upside. Brevin Jordan is. However, Akins is a really good backup tight end to have. He will provide competition for he'll provide competition for the former
Harrison.
For Harrison Bryant. He will provide competition for Harrison Bryant in his contract year. So it's a solid move.
And he is a former teammate. He had his best year with Deshaun Watson. So, I mean, that brings a little bit of familiarity to the receiver room, the tight end room. Because we don't know how that offense is going to look. They may intermingle tight end and wide receiver, so on and so forth. But I think that's going to be an underrated move simply because of the familiarity and the competition it will bring to the backup position, which really hasn't been there before. Yeah. And Harrison Bryant's kind of been coasting, since he was drafted, and now he's not going to be able to coast anymore.
Okay,
or else
so
he's
let's
going to
get
lose
to
his
the
damn job.
AFC South divisions. The AFC South division
go.
really quickly. I'm going to start with the Texans. They've made a few moves. They traded for Shaq Mason. I guess they cut. AJ Cann because I don't see AJ Cann on the Texans depth chart. I thought the Texans did not release him, but I'm on Our Lads. I don't see AJ Cann. I think that means the Texans released him. We were both critical of Cann.
Huh.
We didn't hate him, but we were very critical of his 2022 season. We thought he underperformed.
Yeah, but
So they traded
but
for
not
Shaq
to the
Mason.
point
They got
of
Shaq Mason for a 7th round pick, which is a solid move because he rebounded in Tampa despite playing with New England his entire career. The Texans also added Robert Woods as their replacement to Brandon Cooks, who they know they're going to trade post June 1st. So it's probably going to be Nico Collins, Woods, and John Mechie competing for the number 1 receiver job or whoever the Texans drafted to. They did bring in Case Keenum. So Jeff Driscoll's gone, and you're going to have Keenum and Mills competing for the backup job. I still think the Texans draft a quarterback at 2, and it's going to be the quarterback competition between the rookie, Davis Mills, and Case Keenum for that. I expect the rookie to win, but there are reports the Texans might take Anthony Richardson at 2, and maybe the Texans decide, you know what, we're going to develop Richardson while the rookies suck with shitty receivers, and then we'll upgrade our weapons. I don't know what the Texans are going to do. We're not going to have a good idea
I don't know
until after the draft because they have 2 first-rounders this year, 2 third-rounders. They have 4 6th-round selections as well. They don't have a 5th-round pick, but they have 2 7th-rounders and 4 6th-rounders, and they have that 4th-rounder in the exact same spot. They got Dameon Pierce last year. So.
There have been some criticisms of Richardson and his inability to read a defense to the
I think Stroud and Young are going 1 and 2 personally. But I've heard a lot of insiders, even guys like Benjamin Albright, saying the Panthers want a pocket quarterback, and they think Stroud, with his size, is a better fit for their team. Young might have the most upside, but Stroud might be a better scheme fit for their offense. So I want to see what both QBs do at their pro day before I do my final mock draft. I've got the first 6 rounds set up, and I actually finished the news ticker for the 7th round before the podcast today. So that I did get done. So it was a pretty productive morning, but I mean, outside of trading for Shaq Mason and adding Robert Woods, they did bring in Sheldon Rankins. I do like that move. Sheldon Rankins, Texans needed some leadership on their defensive line, and Sheldon Rankins, a one-year, $10 million deal. I actually really like that move for the Texans. And they also signed Jimmy Ward to pair with Jalen Petir. And Tavier Thomas, last year's starting nickel corner, got injured early in the year. Texans re-signed him to team-friendly deals. So Tavier Thomas and Desmond King are basically competing for the nickel job in training camp. Yeah. And you have Jimmy Ward.
Thomas was one of the.
Yeah, Jimmy Ward.
Yeah, Tavier Thomas was actually one of the better.
That is a much improved handler. I'm not saying they won't have their struggles. But that's an improvement over what you had because.
Yeah, agreed. But something that we were talking about earlier in the season, I remember, how good Tavier Thomas was and how great he was playing for the Texans when he got injured and how much it hurt them and he went down.
And there's one more move.
How much
there's
it hurt
actually
them when he
2
went
more
down.
moves the Texans made. They got Winovich as a backup to Jonathan Greenard because their starting left end was the guy because Mario Addison. They brought in Jerry Hughes and Mario Addison for Buffalo. So they cut Addison to save cap space. And they have Greenard starting with Hughes. But they also added former Browns pass rusher Chase Winovich to replace Mario Addison on a cheap friendly deal.
Well, with Winovich we didn't see much of last year because he was injured all year. So is he fully recovered in what was basically an entire year of injury?
Well, the Texans GM Nick Caserio was with the Patriots when they drafted Winovich in 2019. I think Caserio is just gambling on Winovich at this point.
Yeah,
they don't
because
really have
that was
edge rusher to round out their core. And while Hughes is effective,
because that was going to be our first look at.
Because
that was going to be our first look at Winovich as a 43. Yeah, that was going to be our first look at Winovich as a 43, and now he's going back to the 34, the
No,
more
the
pass
Texans run a
rush
43,
linebacker
Joey.
they
The Texans run a
They
43
do now?
slash nickel defense. They've ran a 43 for a while.
Yeah, I thought they were running a hybrid last year. I thought they were running a little bit of a hybrid last year.
Well, I think they're going to run a 43 slash nickel defense because that's what the Niners ran. They ran a hybrid defense that was 43 base and nickel. Those were the two packages DeMeco Ryans used in San Francisco. I think that's what they're going to run.
Okay.
Matt Burke's going to be transitioning from the Cardinals defensive line coach in a 34 defense to calling the plays in a defensive scheme he's not necessarily familiar with. It's going to be a big transition, but the guy J.J. Watt recommended, so we'll see what happens with the Texans.
Sure, the Texans. We will. The Colts.
Gardner Minshew. I don't know if they've done anything else besides add Gardner Minshew. I mean, it's been a pretty quiet offseason for the Colts. And they did
my
trade
buddy D, who is a big Colts fan.
So Gilmore's no longer on the Colts. They traded him away.
Yeah, my buddy D, who's a Colts fan, I wanted him to go to a Colts-Jags game this year. Almost got him to go to one last year. He said that they made one other move.
They brought in Samson Ekubom to replace Yannick. Samson Ekubom was the left end next to Nick Bosa. And he was a good left end starter, but he's not necessarily an every down player.
Yeah, so
you're going to have
for me, it's like
or Samson Ekubom struggling against NFL left tackles in the AFC South. We're talking Cam Robinson, Larry Tunsil. Luckily for the Colts, the Titans don't have their left tackle.
And
otherwise,
it's like
shit.
You're going to go against that Jags defense that ramrodded you last year.
And they don't have
offensive line that really gassed you last year.
So you don't have Stephon Gilmore. I think that makes things even easier for Trevor Lawrence now with him gone.
It does. It's like I think Indianapolis.
Because Kenny Moore's moving
a full rebuilding mode.
But right now, Isaiah Rodgers and undrafted corner Dallas Flowers from Pittsburgh State are the Colts' two starting corners on the outside with Kenny Moore and at nickel. And frankly, Moore's their best corner of those three. It's not even close. So I don't know what the fuck the Colts are doing. Like, Trevor Lawrence might score 40 on the Colts next year if those two are starting and Kenny Moore is playing nickel. I'm being serious, Joey. Lawrence might score 40 on the Colts next year. Those guys are your week one starters.
They gave me a score 40 on him last year.
Good luck, Chris Ballard.
They gave me a score 40
Maybe he'll score 50 on him. I'm 56. I'm not.
Maybe. The Colts defense, they got to be something.
But in Chris Ballard's defense, he's been more proactive than the Titans. The Titans really haven't done anything yet. They're trying to clear up cap space. And they've lowered their asking price for running back Derrick Henry. They were initially asking for a first-round pick for Derrick Henry. They have lowered that asking price to a second-round pick and a day 3 selection. And I wouldn't do that because these next 3 running back drafts are good. This year's running back draft is pretty deep, but 2024 has 3 first-round backs. You're talking Blake Corum, Travion Henderson, Brian Allen, Wisconsin, and Donnie Edwards, Michigan. Those 4 running backs could all go in round 1. In 2025, you have Nicholas Singleton, Penn State. You have Trevor Etienne, Florida, and you have the Oregon State freshman from Texas who kicked ass last year. All 3 of those running backs could go in round 1 in 2025. I know it's premature to say that, but the next 3 running back drafts, at the top at least, look pretty decent. So, I mean, if you could get a first for Henry, I'd move him right now. But I think most NFL teams understand that the next 3 running back drafts are semi-decent, so they're not willing to give up a first for Henry. So, and the Titans, I think, have succumbed to that realization that they're not going to get a first for Derrick Henry, especially with the next 3 running back drafts. So they've lowered their price.
Yeah, especially with the wear and tear in his age. It's like, that's one reason I am thankful that the Browns had Kareem Hunt for those years because that took a lot of wear and tear off
Here's
of
the thing,
Kareem
Joey.
Hunt.
If the Titans trade Derrick Henry for less than a first-round pick, He could tear it up like A.J. Brown and come back to bite the Titans in the ass again. It could.
He could. He could. It's the problem I see with it. It's like with the Browns, with Chubb, they had Hunt. Took a lot of wear and tear off Hunt.
And
the Titans had nobody. They had Henry.
The Tennessee City Board voted to push the Titans Stadium back to the fall of 2027. So the Titans can really take their time with this rebuild and get it right so they're ready to contend by 2027. They don't have to get they don't have to really, because you want this team ready to contend by 2027 when the new stadium opens. You'd like to have them in contention by 2026 so people are buying season tickets to the new stadium. But at the same token, you have 4 years to get this right, to not fuck this up. So
So you may not even need to trade Henry.
4 good drafts.
You may not even need to trade Henry this year. I mean, because if they moved it back a year, I mean, that wear and tear on Henry, you could just run Henry into the ground as you rebuild. Maybe get another running back in the draft this year or next year. So I hate to say that as somebody who likes Henry.
I mean, Ben Jones, the Titans center, is gone. They moved Aaron Brewer, their left guard, inside the center. They got backup 49. Daniel Brunskill was a backup on the 49ers offensive lineman, and the Titans signed him as a starter. So somehow the Titans have made their interior offensive line worse. And their left tackle at the moment is Andre Dillard, the Eagles' backup left tackle. He's getting a second chance with the Titans at the moment. I mean, I don't think Andre Dillard keeps the Titans from drafting a left tackle at 11 if Paris Johnson Jr. is there. I just don't. Because, I mean, honestly, he was a bust. I mean, Dillard was. I'm glad he's getting a second chance. I think he'll end up as the backup left tackle by week 1 if the Titans, unless the Titans pass on a left tackle 11. I think he'll be the backup. Or maybe the Titans are trying to tank for a top 5 pick in 2024 because you get that top 5 pick, that opens up Caleb Williams and Drake May as possibilities. And if you don't pick high enough for a QB, you could get Olawanu Fashanu Penn State or Joe Alt Notre Dame with 3 or 4. So maybe the Titans are using Dillard as a stopgap to try to maximize the possibility of getting that top 5 pick in 2024. I don't know.
Maybe.
They've been quieter than usual. Titans and Colts have both been quieter than usual.
It's interesting, but the one thing I'm getting out of it is that these guys are basically telling the Jaguars, this is your division. Have at it, Hoss.
Basically,
because
this is the Jaguars' division until 2025. Essentially, if the Texans hit on their next 2 drafts in 2023 and 2024, they will have enough talent to push the Jaguars for maybe a wild card spot, possibly split with Jacksonville, but they're not going to sweep the Jaguars. That's all. But
not a chance.
Colts, they have to get it right at quarterback. And if Bernard Raymond can play like he did down the stretch, maybe the Colts have a shot, but I would argue the Colts are a long shot in that respect. I want to quickly view the Colts depth chart one more time. I think they added someone else that I didn't mention. I thought they added another receiver in free agency, but I guess I was wrong on that. But we got to get to the Jaguars really quickly. So, and Zach Moss, Nick Foles is still on the Colts active roster. The Colts never cut Nick Foles. So if they draft Richardson or Levis at 4, you can see Minshew and Foles both play before the rookie gets inserted. That's not out of the realm of possibility. If they draft Richardson or Levis at 4, you could see one of those rookies run out as a third stringer. I know Colts fans would be panicking, but it probably is the best thing for the team right now. I mean, Colts are ready. I think Colts are ready to
people forget. I think people forget Minshew is a solid starter in the NFL. The problem is he is upgradable. So
were Minshew and Foles teammates from the Jaguars during, or was Nick Foles injured during?
He was injured. That's what gave. Yeah, that's what gave Minshew the opportunity to actually start, because Foles got a season-ending injury or something.
Yeah.
But Minshew is a decent starter in the NFL. He's probably 20, 25 in the middle of the road starter. But
okay,
the thing is,
Yahoo
he's
Sports has
upgradable.
reported. I do have a transaction. Breaking news, Joey. Trey Herndon has re-signed a team-friendly deal. So the Jacksonville Jaguars are the first team in the AFC to bring back all 22 starters on both sides of the ball. Duval.
That's impressive.
Get a round of applause from me for that. I am impressed.
Duval.
And Joey's going to be yelling Duval so loud that Ron Burgundy hears Joey yelling Duval, especially after the Chargers in that wild card loss. Sorry, Chargers fans. This is just how it is.
Hell.
Here's a playoff game.
Here's the thing.
Get roasted by Joey.
When the Jags won, get into the playoffs, I was standing at the bus stop. I was watching on my phone. People were driving by from the beach, yelling, Duval, and I yelled, Duval. It was at the bus stop. It's like people were riding down the highway as they were going by yelling it. You know, the only place, they should rename Jaguars because people know Duval more than they do Jacksonville, even though Jacksonville encompasses the entire county of Duval.
Yeah, I want to get to the
So
AFC
it's just rename them the Duval Jags.
One conference. We may have to save the NFC free agency updates for next week, but I want to at least try to clear the AFC conference before the college basketball games at 12:10. But in my defense, the first college basketball game is Furman versus I think it's Furman versus San Diego State. The second game is Tennessee versus Duke at 2 p.m. So I'm not opposed to missing the first game of the tournament because Tennessee versus Duke's a more exciting game than San Diego State versus Furman. Let's face it. So I'm okay with continuing the podcast during that game if we have to, but let's roll through the next division, the AFC East. So the Bills, they brought back Jordan Poyer. They've essentially replaced they brought in a guard through free agency. The Bills did. They brought in they signed a guard through free agency. I don't remember who they got. I know the Jets, pretty simple. Try to get Aaron Rodgers without giving up a first. The Packers want a first for Rodgers and something else. The Jets really only want to give up a second in this year's draft for Rodgers. And essentially the Jets have the leverage here because the Jets can say, you know what? If you're not going to give us what we want for Rodgers, we'll go out and get someone else through free agency or the draft. So, I mean, and I honestly think Rodgers is going to get traded to the Jets. But the Bills went out. They signed
he announced that he will.
Connor McGovern, who came in. Connor McGovern started at left guard for a few games when Tyron Smith was injured. But now Dallas will have Tyron Smith, and the other guy from Texas Tech, the other tackle they had last year. The guy who suffered an ACL, that Terrence Steele. So they're going to have Steele, Tyron Smith, and Tyler Smith next season, all under contract. So that left Connor McGovern as the odd man out. And Connor McGovern's going to come in and replace Roger Saffold. And Ryan Yates and Ike Bodger, who took a year off for personal reasons, are going to be competing for the right guard job. So I don't think the Bills have to draft a guard early now. If they like McGovern at left guard and they've got Bates and Bodker competing for right guard, I'm not saying the Bills won't draft a guard, but he won't be a day one starter. That's what I'm saying. Because with McGovern there, you've got that stopgap. And James Cook's taken over for Singletary. You've still got Hines. You do need a third running back for depth. But you've got your top three receivers in Davis, Diggs, and Shakir. But you just released Isaiah McKenzie. Crowder's a UFA. Cole Beasley's a UFA. Kumero's a UFA. You could definitively argue that's all of the Bills' depth. They did pick up Deontay Hardy from the Saints, though. Very speedy, deep threat. So, I mean, the Bills don't have a lot of depth at receiver. And Mark Suba believes that if Isaiah McKenzie goes to the Giants, that Dable will use him correctly and utilize him more. And that argument's debatable. I'm not criticizing that, but I don't necessarily agree with that point either. So, and as far as the Bills go, they have every defensive starter back except Jermaine Edmonds. They managed to bring back Jordan Poyer on a team-friendly deal. They do have Micah Hyde back, and they have DeMar Hamlin. He could be cleared to play next season. So it's not like the Bills are in deep shit anymore. I mean, they've got every starter except Edmonds back. And if you get Trent Simpson at 28, this Bills team might be the favorite to win the NFC if you exclude the Bengals. I mean, because you look at the 3-star QBs in the AFC, Burrow, Allen, Mahomes, the Bills get a new stadium in 2026, and the only one of those 3 that hasn't gone to the Super Bowl yet is Josh Allen. So there is the most pressure on him because everybody thought he would take that leap this year, but I kept telling you the Bills are a year away. Just wait. And now I'm trying to figure out what they're going to do with middle linebacker, because if they can figure that out, I think they are the team outside the Bengals. But if they don't, you're looking at maybe the Jaguars. Jaguars probably jump them, and maybe the Chargers or Chiefs jump them, depending on what happens in the draft. My friend Kyle, I'm at his house at the moment. I got relocated from the kitchen to the attic, but he thinks the Chiefs could have an awesome draft and just position themselves to repeat. And you can't really rule out that possibility either, Joey. You can't rule out the possibility of the Chiefs dominating the draft again, rounds 1 through 7, and reloading, because Chiefs have a first, a second, they have a 3rd round pick. They don't have 2 3rd round picks, but they have 1. They have 2 4th round picks. They have their 5th round pick. They have 2 6th round picks. They don't have their 6th round pick at 32 in round 6. But they do have the number 1 pick in round 6, because when the Dolphins traded Tyreek Hill to Kansas City, Miami didn't send their 6th round pick in 2023 to Kansas City. Miami sent the Bears pick from Kansas City, the Bears pick. And the Dolphins traded Jakeem Grant to the Bears for a 2023 6th rounder from Chicago. So Miami traded the pick from Chicago to Kansas City to get Tyreek Hill, thinking that the Bears wouldn't be the worst team in the league. All of a sudden, the Chiefs have the number 1 pick in round 6, as well as the last pick in round 6. I think the Chiefs also have 2 7th round picks, including the last pick in round 7 and a comp pick in round 7. So Brett Veach has 2 6th rounders, 2 7th rounders, 2 4th rounders, plus a 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 5th. I think the Chiefs might be the only team in the league with a pick in each round of the draft. That's fucking scary, Joey. It is. It's like, if they have another good draft, who knows when their Super Bowl window is going to end, especially with the officiating. I mean, hate to say it, but as long as they got Kelsey,
I'm not sure, because a lot of AFC teams.
But with the Chiefs,
a lot of AFC
really
teams
say bet on them right now. See what they do in the draft, and then make a decision if you think they're a contender or not. Chiefs are in wait and see mode, whether we like it or not. Because if they have a draft like 2019, the Chiefs could end up putting everything together in 4 years later. But if they have a draft like they did in 2021 and 2022, this rebuild might be quicker than we anticipate for the Chiefs. So, yeah, the Chiefs lost a lot of guys, but the Bills really took care of a lot of their need. The Jets have a lot of defensive tackles they need to add, but they did bring back Quincy Williams. They did trade for Chuck Clark. They did sign Alan Lazard as a number 2 receiver. I don't think they cut Corey Davis or Elijah Moore. That's the crazy thing. So Corey Davis might move to the slot, or they might cut Davis to save cap space down the road post June 1st. And they're in a really good position where the Jets, Aaron Rodgers puts everything together. This offensive line stays healthy. They are a wild card team at the very worst. But right now, with Dwan Brown's injuries, with Elijah Vera Tucker's season-ending injury, with Becton having 3 consecutive season-ending injuries, right now I'm very bearish on the Jets. I'm not ready to buy low on them yet, but they got a chance.
Well, as far as the Chiefs go, with the retooling of the Browns, with the upgrade of the Bengals, with the Bills looking to really push in this year, and
argument
with the Jets and Aaron Rodgers,
and that doesn't sound bullshit.
Yeah.
Last year, a lot of people were saying the Chiefs are going to finish last and finally have their setback year once Tyreek Hill didn't. I was one of a handful of people, along with Peter Schrager, Tony, and some other people that actually said the Chiefs will still be a Super Bowl team without Tyreek Hill. And we in the minority were correct. Now, I do think the Chiefs could have a setback season this year, though, because you still have some core players on a rookie deal, but, you know, you lost two of your three defensive tackles. You lost Juju and haven't replaced him. You lost Thornhill, and you brought in Buccaneers safety. You brought in the Buccaneers safety from Kentucky. Forget his name, but he was the Buccaneers strong safety next to Antoine Winfield. Mike Edwards. You brought in Mike Edwards. He's a pure strong safety, and he's a good depth player. But you have Brian Cook and Mike Edwards essentially competing for a starting safety job, and you might have to move strong safety Justin Reed over to free safety, because I don't think either Mike Edwards or Brian Cook is nearly as good as Justin Reed in zone coverage. Reed might be a pure strong safety, but he is far superior to both of those guys in zone coverage, so you might have to move Reed over to free safety. If you don't want to draft early, you might have to bite the bullet and move Reed, who's a natural strong safety.
I do think,
and that could backfire too. Who knows?
Well, I think the one thing that I don't want to dismiss is last year the Chiefs' decline was predicted on what they did. This year, I think the Chiefs' decline is depicted not by anything the Chiefs are doing, but how much these other teams in the AFC are saying, enough's enough.
Because they're about as pissed off as Samuel L. Jackson and Snakes on a Plane. Brandon Beane, the Bengals front office, they're about – Mahomes has 2 Super Bowls, and their Pro Bowl QBs have no rings. Yeah. They're about as pissed off as Samuel L. Jackson and Snakes on a Plane, where Samuel L. Jackson just snaps and says, I've had it with these motherfucking snakes on this motherfucking plane. That is where those front offices are. That is how much they hate the Chiefs.
Yeah, I do. I really do think that.
Sorry for language, everyone, but it's true. The Chiefs.
Yeah, based on these results, the Bengals have doubled down. The Browns have doubled down. The Bills have doubled down. It's just the Jets have gone all in.
34 left end and free safety to replace. You need to replace Jerry Tillery and Nasir Adderley. The Chargers brought in Eric Kendricks to replace Drew Tranquill. And let's face it, Kendricks is an upgrade over Tranquill. They re-signed Trey Pipkins. They get Slater back at left tackle. And if Slater is healthy and you move Jamar Salyer into left guard, replace Matt Filer, Chargers offensive line may be where it was 2 years ago. You didn't cut Keenan Allen. You didn't cut Mike Williams. You didn't charger. You somehow avoided chargering. But because of the Chargers' history to charger, Joey's going to be bearish on the Chargers. While I'm bullish on the Chargers right now with Kellen Moore, Joey's going to remain bearish on the Chargers until they don't charger. That's just the bottom line. Chargers win the AFC West. And if they lose the wild card to the Chiefs, they're still going to get roasted by Joey. That's just how it is now. Sorry, Charger fans. It's just how it is. I don't blame you. My friend is very bearish on the Chargers himself. I'm bullish on the Chargers right now, because I feel like if they have a good draft, they can actually position themselves as the new team in the division, because the enemy's gone. Matt Nagy is the offensive coordinator. The Chiefs promoted their quality control coach to quarterbacks coach. Their other quality control coach is the receivers coach now. So there's a lot of coaching movement on the Chiefs right now in Kansas City. A lot of movement. They've had to remove 2 offensive quality control coaches to positional coaches roles. So you're going to have a brand new quarterbacks coach, a brand new receivers coach. So if Mahomes decides, okay, I'm going to come in, Mahomes is first one in, last one out type of guy. But like, let's say Mahomes and his family have something personal planned and he doesn't want to go to OTAs and he needs to build new rapport with the receivers. And you have a first-year QBs coach, a first-year receiver coach, and you have Matt Nagy taking over for Eric Bieniemy as offensive coordinator. Not saying Mahomes is going to have a bad year, but he may not match what he did during his MVP season. There is a possibility that happens, as crazy as it sounds, Joey. Now, Tony's going to be the number 1. They're going to have Valdez-Scantling and Sky Moore compete for the number 2 job. Whoever loses that will be the slot receiver, and Justin Ross will be back from his season-ending injury. So you'll have Justin Ross back from his season-ending injury, and he might do some damage on this roster as well. So I'm just saying, Chiefs could be just as lethal at receiver, but they could also take a step back with these new positional coaches. I could see this going either way, because the Chiefs had continuity. Outside of losing Mike Kafka, the Chiefs had continuity everywhere in the front office. Ryan Poles and Kafka were really the only losses during the Chiefs' offseason when they lost to the Bengals in the AFC title game. Those two are the only front office guys they lost. Now you lose Bieniemy, you promote Matt Nagy to coordinator, and you have to move 2 quality control coaches to quarterbacks and receivers coach. That's a transition. It may not be Mahomes might be good enough to mask that transition, but it's still a transition nonetheless, Maybe we disagree here, but I think that is somewhat of a transition.
Well, it is a transition because you have the same guy running the same show for years, along with Andy Reid. Now you've got an Andy Reid guy who went off on his own, who's back with Andy Reid.
And Matt Nagy was Mike Kafka's replacement. He was not the guy the Chiefs envisioned. They just felt like he was the best replacement to Kafka. We've already seen Nagy fail as a head coach. Now, could he become Andy Reid's successor if he works hard and he stays in Kansas City till Reid retires? Potentially. That's probably what McDaniel should have done, but if you're Matt Nagy, you learn as much as you freaking can from Mr. Reid, and try not to screw up if you get another opportunity. That's really all you can do at this point, because Nagy screwed up pretty badly in Chicago. But we talked about the Bills. We talked about the Jets with Rodgers. The Dolphins added Jalen Ramsey. They traded a 3rd-round pick to get Jalen Ramsey.
That also, Chris, this does bring up history repeating itself. Because remember, John Dorsey, before he went to the Browns, was the Chiefs general manager. He made mistakes with the Chiefs. He got into a power struggle. He got fired. He went to the Browns. He made mistakes. He got into a power struggle. He got fired. Is something like this going to happen with Nagy and one of his underlings? I don't know, but it seems like, especially if he's thinking he's going to be Andy Reid's successor, that's maybe he gets impatient. Could he get fired again? If he gets impatient, it's a possibility. And with the Chiefs, we know getting into it with Andy Reid, it doesn't end well for you.
Yeah, but the Jets, I think the Jets are one of these teams, they could go either way, because I feel like if they get Rodgers and the offensive line stays healthy, Breece Hall stays healthy, they could be wild card 1. One of my friends actually thinks they could make the Super Bowl. I'm not that freaking bold, but I'm just saying, Aaron Rodgers' playoff record is 11-10. I think he's going to end his career in the playoffs 11-11. I think he gets to one more wild card game, and then the Brett Favre effect kicks in. And then age starts to catch up to Rodgers, because it already started to catch up to Rodgers last year. But you could argue he had the worst supporting cast in his career, along with injuries on the offensive line. He'll have the offensive rookie of the year, Garrett Wilson. Lazard is number 1 from Green Bay. He'll have all 3 tight ends back. Corey Davis back, Elijah Moore back, Breece Hall back from a season-ending injury. Okay, his supporting cast on offense with the Jets, you could argue it's better than what he had in Green Bay. If everyone's healthy, you can make a legitimate argument. And you got that defense with Williams, Sauce Gardner, everyone in the front 7's back. I mean, the Jets have their entire front 7 back. They have their top 2 corners back. I think they have Jordan Whitehead, Chuck Clark, LaMarcus Joyner, and Ashton Davis. I think Joyner is the only one of those 4 that's a UFA. I think the rest of those 3 safeties are all under contract on prove-it deals next season, Joey. So, I think Chuck Clark's an upgrade over LaMarcus Joyner. Not a huge upgrade, but an upgrade in terms of overall talent. So, I'm just saying. And the Jets' strength of schedule is better than Miami. Miami is the second toughest schedule behind Philadelphia in the entire league. I'm just saying. And the Patriots made some moves too. They got Juju. I like Juju. I can't say Juju's a definitive number one. Wes thinks he's a definitive number one because of what he did in Kansas City last year. They got Riley Reif. I see him as more of a backup right tackle because Riley Reif had a chance to be the Bears' right tackle, and he couldn't even win the Bears' right tackle job in training camp. So what does that tell you? He's probably a replacement to the backup right tackles because New England lost Marcus Cannon, Isaiah Wynn, and Connor McDermott all to free agency, and they traded Justin Herron to the Raiders. So, and Yadni Kajus is a free agent too. So I think Riley Reif is the backup right tackle. I think the Patriots are going to possibly draft a tackle, move Trent Brown back to right tackle, and then Riley Reif would be the swing tackle. I think that was the thought process behind that move. Patriots cut Jalen Mills. They re-signed Jonathan Jones. They re-signed Jabril Peppers to replace Devin. With Devin McCourty retiring, Duggar or Peppers is going to move over to free safety, and the other is going to play strong safety. And honestly, Duggar's better in zone coverage than Peppers, in my opinion. But the Patriots did give Peppers a 2-year extension, so that shows they have some confidence in Peppers. I mean, last year, Peppers was basically a depth player on that secondary, a backup safety / corner. This year, he's going to have a bigger role. And the fact that Belichick trusted him enough to give him a 2-year deal tells me something. What do you think of the Patriots' moves? I know Mac Jones is still the quarterback, and that sort of puts the Patriots in purgatory. At the same token, the Patriots did get Gesicki from the Dolphins too, and James Robinson. So James Robinson's on the Patriots, Juju's on the Patriots, Gesicki's a number 2 tight end to replace Jonnu Smith. So, yeah.
I thought the Patriots did a nice job, but I think the biggest concern is going to be
if Tua is healthy, you have the worst quarterback in the division. If Aaron Rodgers becomes a Jet and Tua avoids concussions, you have the worst quarterback in the division to the point where you may only win 2 to 5 games.
Agreed.
That's the problem.
Agreed. Zach Jones
I love their pass rush. They had 2 edge rushers get 10 sacks, and Belichick does an amazing job reloading on defense to the point where it's unrivaled. Even without A-tier players, even without stars, Belichick is such a defensive guru, he can just reload on defense. But I think Mac Jones and it's kind of sucks because what happened with Mac Jones is exactly what happened with who's the QB I'm thinking of? He was drafted after Bledsoe, Rick Meyer. Rick Meyer outplayed Bledsoe his rookie year, and then he sucked the next 2 years. But here's the thing. Mac Jones has such an admirable work ethic. He gets the Patriots practice facility at 4 a.m. I think that's when Brady got there. Sometimes Brady got there at 3:30. But Brady's accuracy and football intelligence was vastly superior to Mac Jones. No offense, but so I'm just saying, with Aaron Rodgers and healthy Tua, the Patriots have the worst QB in the division by a significant margin. And I'm not sure these stopgap additions are going to be enough. But they brought in Bill O'Brien, so we can't dismiss them. But unless they have a kick-ass draft, the Patriots, in my opinion, are a long shot this season. And I don't really think there's much else to say about the Patriots. I think we both agree on that. So should we just transition to the AFC West now? Because I feel like we've covered the East.
Yeah.
All right. We talked about the Chiefs. Let's talk about the other teams. The Raiders replaced Carr with Garoppolo. They lost Stidham to Denver. Denver's probably made the most moves. I thought the Chargers have made the best moves, but the team that's made the most moves is Denver. McGlinchey's now the right tackle next to Garrett Bowles, and Ben Powers is your left guard. The Broncos did release Graham Glasgow, their center. So Lloyd Cushenberry, who was the starter during Denver's rookie year, sat out the last 2 years behind Glasgow. He is now going to be the starting center in a contract year. And your right guard is Quinn Miners, who's established himself as a solid starter. So that's Denver's starting offensive line. Much fucking better than anything that their quarterback has had over the offensive line the last half decade. Easily. You could argue this, if Peyton Manning had this offensive line during Super Bowl 50, he would have matched 5,000 yards like he did in 2013. Like Peyton Manning broke Brady's passing yard record in 2013. I think he could break that record with this offensive line if he was still in his prime. And, Broncos are talking about trading Cortland Sutton or Judy, but I don't think they're going to go through with it unless they get a premium return, because they know they can't trade one of those guys without getting a premium return. I think the Broncos genuinely want to move Sutton or Judy. At the same token, they're not going to trade one of those two unless they get a first-round pick back. That's just Denver's thought process, because they don't have a first-round pick this year, and they are hell-bent on getting a first-round pick. But I love what Sean Payton's doing. He's talking about how Denver, we need to make Denver like a concert-type venue. And you can already tell Payton is changing the culture in Denver. And, if Javonte Williams is healthy, who knows what happens with Denver, because I think Denver is a really interesting team. I mean, I don't know if they're going to be in this conversation for a wild card spot, but if McGlinchey and Powers play well, I can't rule them out. I mean, they've got Greg Dulcich as their new number one tight end. They have Judy, Patrick Sutton, Kendall Hilton, KJ Hamler, and Montrell Washington all healthy. Last year, Denver's backup receivers were dealing with injuries. They also brought in Samaj Perine from the Bengals to replace Marlon Mack, Latavius Murray, and Chase Edwards, and the other running back from Melvin Gordon. So they had multiple guys replacing Williams. They bring in Perine and Stidham on offense. So I like what Denver's done on offense. And that's just the offense. On defense, they brought in Zach Allen to be their 34 left end. And they brought in Jonathan Harris from Chicago, the Bears defensive tackle, I think, to be their new 34 right end. And they extended Singleton. So Singleton's playing with Jewell. You have Randy Gregory and Baron Browning as your edge rushers with Bonito. You have Caden Stearns replacing Kareem Jackson. And Kawan Williams, former 49ers nickelback, is Denver's new nickel corner, with the Broncos replacing Ronald Darby. I would bring in another corner to challenge Kawan Williams for the nickel corner, but you can do that with one of your third-round picks. You can get Trevius Hodges Tomlinson, that 5'7" corner from TCU. I think he'd be good competition for Kawan Williams. Maybe he learns under him for a year, and then he becomes Denver's nickelback. I mean, that is a possibility. I don't think Denver's that far off. But again, if Denver's going to turn things around, both Ben Powers and McGlinchey have to step up. If McGlinchey has lapses like he did during last season, Denver's only going to win 5 to 7 games at best, even with Sean Payton. I mean, they got Joe Lombardi and Vance Joseph as the coordinators, so I'm not saying they can't do it. I just think they're in a really tough division, and 5 to 7 wins may be the ceiling. I mean, if McGlinchey plays well, you're talking about 7 to 9 wins. But if he doesn't, you're looking at 5 to 7. I think Denver's record was 5-12 last year. I'm looking that up right now. I think it was 5-12, but I am going to confirm. Yeah, they were 5-12. So I think they can go 7-10 with this lineup if everybody's healthy, because injuries are what killed Denver. I think Denver actually started 2-1, but Garrett Bowles and Javonte Williams both suffered season-ending injuries against the Niners in Week 3, and that essentially ended their season. I mean, let's face it. They didn't have anyone else besides Bowles that could block, and that pretty much crippled their season. What do you think of these moves? I love the Kendricks move. That is my favorite signing, but I feel like Denver's done the most during this free agency.
They've done the most in this division. I think the Raiders did the least in the division. Like I told you, the
Chargers are getting a lot of their guys who are injured back for next season, so they might surprise us. They might.
Well, they might surprise us, but they haven't really done anything in free agency yet. They haven't done anything in free agency yet. The Raiders,
the Chargers did nothing in free agency is false. It's false. They got Kendricks. He is an upgrade over Tranquill.
Outside of Kendricks. I think
They
Chris outside of
re-signed their
Kendrick.
core guys. They brought back Trey Pipkins at right
Well,
tackle. They're getting Slater back. They're moving Salyer inside to replace Filer. And let's face it, Salyer was good for when Slater was injured. Now he's going to be replacing Filer.
That's like me saying, "Hey, go Browns, you got Pochich back."
But here's
It's
the
like,
thing.
no, you got
We
your
don't
guy
know
back.
what's going to happen with Keenan
good.
Allen and Mike
Good.
Williams. If they deal with injuries like they did last year, yeah, the Chargers may just charger their way out of the playoff picture entirely. At the same token, if they're healthy for 17 games, they could win that division. It really comes down to the health of those receivers right now. And is that something you want to bank on at this point?
I agree to that. Yeah, I can agree to that. And
Eckler wanted an extension, but the talks broke down, and now Eckler's saying he's open to a trade. So, if the Chargers trade Eckler, they're going to charger their way out of winning the AFC West. So even when we think the Chargers have it figured out, they do something stupid like trading Eckler in a contract year. That could be the move that chargers them out of the division. I mean,
right.
You, as a Browns fan, I know you can't stand Austin Eckler with a passion. You respect him as a running back, and you love the fact that he wants to win for his fantasy football players. You love that about Eckler, but as a Browns fan, this guy really pisses you off.
Unless he signs with the Browns, then he won't piss me off anymore. Otherwise, he pisses me off.
And that's the thing, there's
interesting situation. Over the last 3 years,
I think
the running back that has averaged the most yards.
I don't think.
Yeah, well,
because Eckler's 27. He's the same age McCaffrey is, and he's had 2 consecutive good seasons. The thing. So,
over the last 3 years, the running back that's had the best games against the Browns on average is Austin Eckler. He's averaging like 120-some yards a game.
And he wants a trade, so I got to wait and see what the Chargers do with Eckler. Do they keep him? They do have some nice backups. Joshua Kelly, UCLA running back from the 2020 Senior Bowl. They have Isaiah Spiller from Texas A&M, and they have I think they drafted a running back out of Missouri too. I'm going to look at the Chargers depth chart really quickly before I charger my way into nonsense. Sorry, Chargers fans. The puns are warranted, but yeah, Eckler and Kelly are the top 2 running backs. Spiller's the 3rd stringer, and Larry Roundtree, the 3rd from Missouri, still on the active roster. I mean, he did lose the 3rd string running back job, but he didn't get cut from the team. And Easton Stick got extended as Justin Herbert's backup. Easton Stick was the 3rd stringer to Chase Daniel last year and Herbert, but Easton Stick initially was the backup to Herbert, and since Easton Stick agreed to a team-friendly deal, they extended him, and they chose to move on from Chase Daniel. So, I mean, all of this comes down to the Chargers being able to stay healthy and what Herbert's going to do under Kellen Moore's offense. Because if Kellen Moore can dethrone the Chiefs, he deserves a head coaching job. I know he sucked in the divisional round. That's why the Cowboys fired him, but he's a heck of a coordinator during the regular season. I mean, there were games where when the Cowboys were fully healthy, they were putting up 40, 50-point clinics. Chargers can do that if their receivers stay healthy, but that's the million-dollar question right now. And because the Chargers don't have a lot of salary cap money, you're not necessarily sold on them being able to do that, especially with all the draft capital the Chiefs have in rounds 1 through 7. Chiefs being the only team in rounds 1 through 7 to have a pick in every single round. That is a hell of an achievement, Joey. I mean, you can't sugarcoat it. That's why you can't dismiss the Chiefs yet. I don't think they repeat personally, but they have a draft pick in rounds 1 through 7. And if Veach works his magic again, you can't rule them out. All right. I'm still in the mood to knock out the NFC. Fuck it. I don't really care for the I don't care for Furman versus San Diego State personally. I'll give our fans an update on that game, but I kind of want to break down the NFC. How do you feel, Joey?
I would rather spread it out to the NFC for next week because let's face it, we got more.
How about this? How about we go until 1 p.m. and we call it a day? We can do we can either talk about some college basketball until 1, or we can break down the NFC next week along with the MLB playoff previews. I'll let you choose because it's 12:20 right now.
Actually, an interesting cross. Let's go with the NCAA.
All right.
I am interested more into
we'll break
today's
down
game.
the NCAA tournament because I think that's what a majority of our audience came here for. And, you know, as fun as it is to talk about football all the time, I mean, if we just talked about football, we'd be here all day. And, you know, there's going to be a lot more free agency moves next week. So, top 7 AFC teams heading into at this point, I'd probably put the Bengals. I would put the Bills. I would put the Jaguars at 1, the Bills at 2, the Bengals at 3, only because the Bengals, we don't know what they're going to do. If they keep their offensive line, the Bengals are 1 or 2 at the very worst. If the Bengals don't keep their offensive line, they could drop to 3 or 4 potentially, depending on how healthy the Chargers are. Chiefs would be my top wild card, but then you can make an argument for the Jets, the Steelers, the Browns, because Steelers and Browns both have easy strength of schedules next year. And you can make an argument for the Jets and shit. You might even make a case for the Broncos if McGlinchey and Powers step up. I mean, there's a lot of possibilities and uncertainty right now, in my opinion, Joey. That's why I say I think we got to wait and see before we rank these teams. We still got to wait and let the process of the offseason play itself out. You know, because another good draft by the Chiefs puts them back in the conversation as the 1 seed. You know, if they have a terrible draft, it opens things up. So, and Kansas City's hosting the draft this year. So not only did the Chiefs win the Super Bowl, they get to host the draft in front of their fans, and they're going to make a ton of money. So they're good. They're happy. But let's talk about the NCAA. Alabama, Houston, Duke, and Arkansas was my Final Four. Wes Langley and I had the same Final Four. Never in my history of doing March Madness have I had an employee, coworker, or just a basketball aficionado, basketball fan, have the exact same Final Four as me. And I've been doing Final Four brackets for fun every year since 1999. Jason Bantle has 3 of the Final Four teams that Wes and I have, except he has Gonzaga instead of 8-seed Arkansas. Now, Wes told me he thinks Duke could win the tournament, and I'll give him credit if they do, because I'm a Duke fan. Wes is a Duke fan. He has a Duke Blue Devils group on Facebook. So if they win the tournament, I will be happy. I will give Wes all the praise in the world. I'll even give him the tiebreaker over me in the March Madness bracket, okay? As a fan. But at the same token, it's like, Duke is the 5 seed, but Fairleigh Dickinson made their job a lot easier because now Duke's going to play Fairleigh Dickinson or Florida Atlantic in the Sweet 16 because heading into the tournament, all the hype was about Penny Hardaway and a Memphis team that beat Houston to win the conference title. Purdue won the Big Ten title. They're both out of the tournament. So as long as Duke doesn't fuck up against my dad's alma mater, Tennessee, they pretty much have a direct path to the Elite Eight. So I wish my dad were still alive because we would bust each other's chops over this game because he went to Tennessee. I was a Duke fan growing up at his restaurant. That's when I first became a Duke fan, 8 years old at 54th Street. I entered a bracket for the first time, and I actually came in second as an 8-year-old. Had Duke beaten Connecticut in 99, I would have won the bracket as a freaking 8-year-old. And the sad thing is that is still my best bracket performance to date. Okay? It's like, I have not rebounded from that. At 25 years, I have not rebounded from that. It's 24 now, but I have not rebounded from that. That was my peak as far as bracketology goes, which is pretty sad. I mean, that was my peak in terms of accuracy for March Madness. But Alabama has 2 NBA players, including Brandon Miller, the top college player in most NBA mock drafts. Houston's got some first-round players. They got a first-round point guard who's dealing with an injury, and they got that forward that you absolutely love. So I picked them, and I even told you when we were talking NBA draft a few weeks ago, I think it's going to be Alabama and Houston the title game. And the Final Four is in Houston this year. So I have Alabama going into Houston, where there's going to be Houston Cougars fans cheering left and right, and they're going to win. Nate Oates, they are going to break the hearts of Jason Bantle has the Houston Cougars winning his bracket. Okay? And Houston Cougars head coach, I like the Houston Cougars head coach a lot. I think he has done an incredible job with their Kelvin Sampson. I think Kelvin Sampson used to be a big time coach in another program. And I really
Kelvin
like
Sampson used to be a big time NBA player.
He's done an incredible job with this team. Yeah, he was the coach of Oklahoma and Indiana for a few years. Then he went to the NBA as an assistant for the Bucks, and then he was an assistant with the Rockets for 4 years. So 8 years of experience as an NBA assistant head coach. Then he returns to Houston as a head coach, and he's been their coach for 10 years. And Houston has their best team in a long time. And it reminds you of their 80s teams. Like, I'm just saying. I remember you talking about Houston a few weeks ago. I mean, what are your thoughts on this team? Because
I like the team. I'm not so sure NCAA finals, unless we get a few more upsets, and then at that point chaos ensues. But I like the team overall, and I do like the coach.
I'll load up the brackets on because I have the brackets updated, like the HTML code. I do have the brackets updated, so we'll go through each bracket one by one, and then we'll end this at 1 p.m. So the South bracket features Alabama and Maryland, the 8-1 seeds. They play tonight at 9:40. Right now, 5-seed San Diego State is playing 13-seed Furman, and I had Virginia in my Sweet 16. Furman ended up ruining my bracket. But Furman's in the round of 32. They're playing San Diego State at the moment. I picked Creighton to go to the Elite Eight. I mean, a lot of people picked Arizona or Baylor in the Elite Eight. I picked Creighton because Creighton had a power forward and center that are first to second round prospects in most NBA mock drafts. And their shooting guard and their small forward are both second round picks this year. And last year, Creighton got to the Elite Eight as a 6 seed. I think Creighton was a 10 seed, and I think they got to the Elite Eight last year. I don't remember exactly how it played out, but I think Creighton was actually. I think Creighton. I gotta look this up really quickly because I remember Creighton being in the Elite Eight last year. And I think St. Peter's got to the Elite Eight as a 15 seed. There were a lot of outliers last year. But Creighton Blue Jays were the I'm trying to get the exact seed for Creighton last year because I think Creighton got to the Elite Eight. I'm just trying to remember what seed they were from the top of my head. And that information I don't have on me at the moment. Because I remember they were the 9 seed. They played San Diego State in the opening round. And they got to the Elite Eight and they lost to Kansas, the eventual champion. Okay, so and outside of Kansas, you had Auburn in that bracket. Auburn had Jabari Smith, top 3 pick. Wisconsin was in that bracket. Iowa was in that bracket. That was not an easy bracket. So for Creighton to sneak under the radar like that really is impressive in some sense because, Creighton. Okay, they said Creighton got to the Elite Eight. That is false. Somebody said Creighton got to the Elite Eight. I just found out they won the opening round and they lost to Kansas in the round of 32. So that is not true. Kansas beat Miami, Florida, who was a 10 seed in the Elite Eight. But Kansas pretty much steamrolled everyone in that bracket because Auburn was the 2 seed. They lost to Miami in the round of 32. Wisconsin was the 3 seed. They lost to Iowa State in the round of 32, who got their ass kicked by Pittsburgh yesterday. And Creighton knocked out San Diego State. So, I mean, Providence was the toughest opponent for Kansas. Kansas only beat Providence by 5 points. They beat Creighton by 7. They blew out Texas Southern and Miami. Kansas was the best team in college basketball. There's a reason why they're the defending champions, okay? But, like, Creighton had 4 NBA prospects in this draft. The only other team with 4 NBA draft prospects is Arkansas. So that's why I have Arkansas in my Final Four and Creighton in my Elite Eight. And the crazy thing is, none of my Final Four teams have been eliminated yet. At the same token, I don't think I've gotten to the Sweet 16 with all of my Final Four teams in a long time. And even if I get those teams to the Sweet 16, they'll probably, one of them could slip up in that second week. And, you know, Creighton, they're playing Baylor. Baylor has 1 NBA prospect, but that player's projected to go in the top 10. And Creighton plays Baylor tomorrow. I think that is going to be a very interesting matchup because I don't think Baylor's supporting cast is as good as it was a year ago when they lost to North Carolina as the top seed in their bracket. So I really like Creighton as a dark horse in this bracket. I know they had some stumbles early in the season, but, you know, Missouri's another team I'm keeping an eye on. Missouri, they got to the SEC tournament semifinals and lost to Alabama. I think Missouri beats Princeton. And I think we get a Creighton-Missouri Sweet 16 matchup next week. But if Princeton beats Missouri tonight, it's going to be Missouri. It's going to be Princeton versus the Baylor-Creighton winner in the Sweet 16 next week. So I think this bracket's really fun because I think Alabama's going to be in the Elite Eight. The question is, which team is going to do just enough to earn the right to play Alabama in the Elite Eight?
I'm putting Alabama on upset alert here against Maryland. Heard some really good things about Maryland. I saw Alabama play here a couple weeks ago. Not as impressed.
Andrew Curtis is picking the win. I think Wes is picking the win. Brian Bayless. Everybody's picking Alabama to win. I think Lisa and Jason were the only ones to pick Houston. But Alabama and Houston are by far the most popular picks this year. So,
well, in this game against Maryland, I'm putting them on upset alert.
Really? Because Maryland doesn't even have any NBA prospects. I initially picked West Virginia before flipping to Maryland at the last minute. So, and Maryland struggled against West Virginia early in that game. Maryland rallied back, but Bob Huggins came out fired up, pissed off, but his guys just couldn't do enough to finish the game. And, you know, Maryland, they go from being the first team to play in the tournament in the round of 64 to the last team to play tonight. So they have more time to prepare for Bama compared to the other teams in the round of 32. You can be critical of that, but that is an advantage to some degree. It's not a huge advantage, but it is somewhat of an advantage. So, and there are no perfect brackets left. So that's the thing. Like, Alabama has some good forwards, but Nate Oates, he's a math teacher, and Nate Oates tells Alabama's guys, just focus on the short range. Do not focus on three-pointers. Alabama actively avoids trying to shoot three-pointers, and they only shoot mid-range shots situationally. So that's the thing. Like, they beat the crap out of Texas A&M in the SEC title game. They have the best player in college basketball. I don't see any reason to pick against Alabama, but, you know, you like Maryland. If Maryland knocks off Alabama, who would be your other team to play Maryland in the Elite Eight? I think Creighton stands out. I know the consensus is rolling with Baylor, but I think we could see Creighton or Missouri get to the Elite Eight. I would pick Missouri over Baylor because Missouri actually got to the semifinals of the SEC tournament, despite being a long shot. And if Missouri had another NBA prospect, I would consider picking them over Baylor. But I feel like the Creighton NC State winner is going to get to the Elite Eight. I do. I think the Creighton-Baylor winner of tomorrow night's game is in prime position to get to the Elite Eight. In a sense, I feel like that those are the two best teams outside of Bama. If I were ranking the top 5 teams in the brackets, Bama would be 1, Creighton 2, Baylor 3, and then I would be torn between Missouri at 4. I really couldn't pick between the remaining 4 teams. I honestly couldn't. Maybe I'm not respecting them enough, but I'm just curious of the remaining teams. Creighton, Baylor, Missouri, Princeton. Who's your challenger to Maryland? If Maryland gets by Alabama, how far do they go? And you think there's another team in this bracket besides Maryland that can make some noise? I can't hear you, Joey.
Yeah, what did you say?
Is there a better team besides Maryland in this bracket? I mean, you've got Creighton and Baylor. I talked about how Creighton had 4 NBA draft eligible prospects. They made the round of 32 last year. Baylor has 1 player in the top 10, but they don't really have anyone else. I would argue their starting 5 is weaker than last year when they were the 1 seed and lost to North Carolina. And then you got Missouri, who made it to the semifinals of the SEC tournament before losing to Alabama. Missouri actually started the year 15-0, but they've been very inconsistent since the start of the year. And then you have Princeton. So is there a second team that could challenge Maryland if Alabama loses to Maryland? Who's the challenger to Maryland in this region before I get to the next region?
If Maryland beats Alabama, I don't think Maryland is an amazing team. I think Creighton could be a good one. Princeton, because they did end up getting the upset there. So I think without Alabama, the region itself is a free-for-all.
I'm saying the Creighton-Baylor winner is probably going to make the Elite Eight, regardless of who wins that game. I think those are the 2 best teams besides Alabama. And Maryland would most likely have to face one of them. But I do think Maryland, to your point, I do think Maryland, if they beat Alabama, they could get to the Elite Eight because right now, Furman and San Diego State are tied at 17. Neither team is pulling away in that game. And, you know, neither team's best players have gotten things going offensively. Now San Diego State hit a 2-point shot. And so far, San Diego State's hit 50% of their field goals. They're 0 for 3 on 3-point shots, San Diego State. But they're 3 for 3 on 3 throws. I don't think either team has an NBA prospect on their I don't think either team has an NBA prospect on their roster. So that honestly, Maryland could beat either one of these teams in the Sweet 16 next week. I really believe that. I think Maryland could beat either San Diego State or Furman if they were to knock off Bama tonight. And they would get to the Elite Eight. And the big question would be if they beat Alabama, could they beat Baylor or Creighton? Because I know that's a discussion you'd like to save for next Saturday if Maryland ends up playing Creighton or Baylor. I feel like this is a to-be-continued segment in this bracket. And if Alabama wins tonight, 9:40, then we'll resume. We'll talk about Alabama. You'll try to make a case for Creighton or Baylor next week or whoever comes out of the other half of the bracket. Because to pick the consensus team to win the tournament, I know that's kind of cliche. It's kind of boring. So I understand why you feel that way. Let's get to the next bracket. Houston Cougars are the undisputed 1 seed, but I would argue their bracket's much tougher than Alabama's. Okay, in this bracket, you have all of the top 5 teams are still in the tournament. Texas ended up beating Kansas to win the Big 12. They're still in the tournament. Xavier is the 3 seed in this bracket. The Indiana Hoosiers are the 4 seed. The Miami Hurricanes are the 5 seed after a narrow win over Drake. And then Pitt knocked off Mississippi State in the play-in game, and they beat Iowa State to get to the next round. The Pitt Panthers. I live in Pittsburgh, and my history teacher talked about his son-in-law. My 7th grade history teacher talked about his son-in-law going to Rivers Casino on St. Patrick's Day for the bachelor party. And he talked about how loud and energetic those Pitt fans were after they beat Iowa State. And Iowa State, they've had some NBA prospects the last few years. And Pitt, I've seen them against Georgia Tech. I've seen them, what they can do. I mean, Pittsburgh, they're going to be playing at 12-10 tomorrow against Xavier. And Xavier struggled against Kennesaw State. Like, Kennesaw State put up a fight against Xavier. And until the end of that game, it looked like Kennesaw State could steal that one. So, I'm kind of curious because I think you can make an argument that this is the toughest bracket of the 4. Because Miami's got a good starting 5. Even though they don't have an NBA player in the top 60, they have a good starting 5. Indiana's probably got the most NBA talent outside of Houston. Texas won the Big 12, and Xavier is my mom's pick to go to the Final Four. And Penn State and Pitt are both in the round of 32. I think this is a really compelling bracket. I'm still picking Houston, but keep an eye out on Indiana and Xavier. Who do you like in this bracket? Like, who are your top 2 teams? Because I think Houston's got to be one of the top 2 teams in this bracket. But I think Indiana, if Indiana gets to the Sweet 16, both Indiana and Houston have 2 first-round picks. And honestly, that's a game that I feel like Indiana would have the best chance of knocking out Houston. We'll get to the other 2 brackets shortly, but I kind of want to get your thoughts on this.
I figure Houston, it would have to be one. I don't know. Maybe Xavier, because Xavier's been pretty consistent this year.
I know Texas won the Big 12, but I think they have one prospect that's a second rounder, and Xavier is a first-round prospect, like a late first-round shooting guard. So they're going to have to run into a team with a really good defensive shooting guard if they're going to be beaten. And I think Houston's the only team that has a really good defensive shooting guard. I mean, Texas had a coaching change midseason. Pitt's got a lot of seniors/veteran players. I think Pitt will be the toughest test for Xavier. But if they win that game, I think they'll beat Texas. They'll go back. They'll make some adjustments. They'll beat Texas. I have Xavier in the Elite 8, Houston. I think Joey pretty much agrees with me on Houston and Xavier in the Elite 8, which is why he really hasn't said much. We'll move on to the 3rd bracket. Now, here is the bracket I had the most drama occurring in. Okay. I had Arkansas beating Kansas to win. I think I had Arkansas beating Kansas to win this matchup. But that's not all. I have Connecticut in the Sweet 16. I have Gonzaga in the Sweet 16, and I have UCLA, despite their injuries, in the Sweet 16. They, even with some of their starters injured, they still beat UNC Asheville pretty convincingly. I'm looking at UCLA. UCLA lost that Final Four game to Gonzaga 2 years ago when Gonzaga was undefeated. I'm looking at UCLA. I'm looking at an Arkansas-UCLA Elite 8. And I got Arkansas winning because of UCLA's injuries. So, yeah, I've got the Arkansas Razorbacks in the Final Four as an 8 seed. But if Kansas wins this game against Arkansas, Kansas is in position to repeat. I think the most compelling game in this bracket has to be Arkansas versus Kansas, easily, because Creighton and Arkansas are the only 2 teams with 4 NBA draft prospects, and you got Arkansas going up against the national champion Kansas Jayhawks. And Bill Self has been having some heart problems. That's why he didn't coach in the Big 12 tournament. That's why he didn't coach on Thursday. This is going to be Bill Self's first game back from a heart condition. So are the guys going to continue to rally around Self? Is he going to be more fired up than usual, or is Kansas going to play with less energy than they have in the biggest game of the year, their season so far? And it's really hard to repeat in college basketball with so much parity. And you've got I think UCLA's got a few decent starters as well. And so does Gonzaga. Gonzaga's got like 3 starters. UCLA's got 3 or 4 starters as well. So this bracket, I think this bracket with Kansas, Arkansas, you can make a definitive argument that this is the toughest bracket to pick. I mean, that's the thing. Like, I think the 2 brackets on the right are the toughest to pick. But my mom has Kansas in the Final Four, the championship game. Jason Bantle had Gonzaga. I don't think anyone picked UCLA in this bracket at all. I think my friend from high school, who I'm hanging out with, picked UCLA, but that's it. Nobody else picked UCLA. Okay? They didn't. So it's like, and that's because 2 of their starters are playing through injuries. And I think they might get to the Elite Eight, but I think Kansas or Arkansas, whoever comes out of that game, is pretty much going to win this bracket. That's pretty much where my thought process is. Because I don't know how Kansas is going to perform. Are they going to play with less energy in Bill Self's first game back from a heart's condition, or are they going to play with more energy and go on a run and try to repeat? Like, that's really the big question with this bracket. And it's probably the most compelling argument you can make.
Well, for me, it is the most competitive bracket because, like I say, it's you have the I believe the repeating champion. Well, not repeating champion, defending champions. You have a couple really strong contenders to them.
I mean, TCU beat Kansas in Lawrence, Kansas, where the Kansas Jayhawks play basketball. TCU beat Kansas on the road. So, I mean, if you count the TCU Gonzaga game, I think this is also the only bracket to have all the top seeds win. Kansas was 1, Arkansas was 8, St. Mary's was 5, Connecticut 4, TCU 6, Gonzaga 3, Northwestern 7, and UCLA 2. But Boise State and Utah State were favorites despite being 10 seeds, and both of those teams lost. But this was the only bracket where all the higher seeds won. So that does say something. I think that makes this the strongest bracket of the 4, like you said. I mean, there's a reason all the top seeds won this bracket. This is a tough-ass bracket.
That it is. And it's a very good possibility the champion comes from this bracket.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think Arkansas, if Arkansas gets the Final Four, that might be the one team Houston matches up well with. But I think you can make a case for UCLA over Houston, Gonzaga over Houston. You can make a case for Kansas over Houston. But, the Final Four is in Houston, Texas this year. So the Houston Cougars will have a home field advantage if they get to the Final Four. But they'll also have to play one of these powerhouse teams in that Final Four. So can they rise to that pressure, that occasion? Because I think Houston was in the Final Four a few years ago. No, I think that was the 2021 Final Four. They played Baylor and lost, I believe. Because I believe last year you had Duke, North Carolina, and then Kansas played someone. I forget who Kansas beat in the Final Four. But, Kansas did win the national title. I remember that. Yeah. Kansas played Villanova. It was a 1 versus 2 seed matchup in the Final Four. So Kansas beat Villanova in the first game. And the year before that, Baylor, Houston, and Kelvin Sampson played Baylor, the eventual national champions. So, and that was the year Gonzaga went 30-0 and lost the title game. That was, they basically did what the Patriots did. But, I think this is, I think Alabama will win if the other teams from the right side of the bracket tire each other out. That's Alabama's best chance to win. But I look at this bracket, You think the top bracket's the weakest. I think this bracket might be the weakest now because Fairleigh Dickin and Florida Atlantic were two teams that I did not expect to get past the round of 64. They both won. Memphis and Penny Hardaway and their 5-star recruits are out of the tournament. Purdue is out of the tournament despite winning the Big Ten. Tennessee beat Louisiana. A lot of people were picking Louisiana as an upset because Tennessee's point guard suffered a season-ending injury. So a lot of people were picking Louisiana as an upset team, but Tennessee's defense stepped up. And, I think Duke's going to beat Tennessee because of that. And I think Duke pretty much has a pathway to the Elite Eight. But can anyone on the lower half of the bracket beat Duke in the Elite Eight? You have a Kentucky team that's recruited well, coached by John Calipari as the 6th seed, underachieved in the regular season, but can make up for it with a strong tournament run. You have a Kansas State team that got the 3 seed despite not winning the Big 12. You have a 7 seed Michigan State team. Tom Izzo's made the NCAA tournament 25, 26 years in a row now, which is just unheard of. I mean, I think he's been in the tournament every year dating back to 97 or 98, which is just freaking unheard of with Coach K retiring now. And if Izzo can get past Marquette, I can't rule out the possibility of them making a run because Marquette has Shaka Smart. Shaka Smart was the coach on Virginia Commonwealth when they made their run to the Final Four a few years ago. And Shaka Smart got fired from Texas. I thought that was a really bad decision. And he's done great at Marquette so far. So I'm kind of intrigued to see how far Marquette can go because Marquette plays in the same stadium as the Milwaukee Bucks. They play in an NBA stadium. They know how to handle big crowds. And Shaka Smart took Virginia Commonwealth to the Final Four. And this team is just as talented as Virginia Commonwealth. I mean, I'm kind of curious. He took Virginia Commonwealth to 2 Final Fours back in the day. I'm kind of curious to see what he can do with this Marquette squad because if they can beat Michigan State and they draw Kansas State, they could get to the Elite Eight. And, who knows what happens at that point. This is Coach Shire's first year replacing Coach K. Yes, he has recruited a hell of a Duke squad. There's a lot of NBA talent on this Duke team. At the same token, it's like, is he as hungrier as Coach K? Is he as fired up? Can he get the guys to buy in? It's a one game at a time mentality. And, I'm kind of curious. The crazy thing is Wes, Jason, and myself all had Duke over Kentucky in the Elite Eight. We look smart now because, Purdue got eliminated and Memphis got eliminated and Tennessee's got an injured point guard. So, really, I don't see a team in the top half of Duke's region between Tennessee, Florida Atlantic, and Fairleigh Dickinson that poses a threat to Duke. I look at the bottom half, I see Kentucky, I see Kansas State, I see Michigan State with Izzo, who's always been a thorn in Duke's ass over the years, and I see Shaka Smart with the 2 seed Marquette, and I'm saying, can any of these 4 teams generate enough traction to knock out the Duke Blue Devils, who have the most NBA prospects of the teams in this pool of 3? Can any of them do enough to keep Duke from getting to Houston? And that's really what I think this bracket comes down to. I think this bracket's a little more exciting than the Alabama bracket, but it's also the weakest bracket outside of the Alabama bracket, which I think you'd agree with that assessment now that Purdue's out of the tournament. Because, I mean, that was Purdue getting knocked out. That was a huge surprise. That pretty much eliminated every perfect bracket in the country. Yeah. Who do you like in this bracket before we wrap up?
I think I'd still go with Duke.
I mean, it's pretty cut and dry. Duke's the best team. I boldly picked Kentucky, but I think regardless of who comes out of it, everybody at Draftutopia came to the same conclusion that Duke's the team to beat in this bracket. And I think that's going to show once again this year. So if we're wrong, we'll talk about it on next week's podcast because next week we're going to have NFC free agency. We're going to break down the Elite Eight games, and you're going to get an MLB playoff preview. You won't see us talk about as much soccer as we usually do. So, yeah. And I think the other game is at halftime. The first game of March Madness is currently at halftime. Ooh. Okay. It was tied at 17-17. San Diego State went on a 13-0 run before Furman hit a basket. So San Diego State looks like they're pulling away from Furman. So that is a spoiler alert. I haven't watched any of the game yet. There's about 3 minutes left in the first half. I'll watch the second half. Because I think we're in agreement, Joey, with all the March Madness games. Even if we do another hour of this, it's like more people are going to be tuned into March Madness than this podcast. But I'll definitely promote the live stream, and, we'll see what happens from there. Because if people like the live stream, the video on YouTube, I'm open to promoting that as well as linking the podcast after the show. So, we'll see how this goes. And I think next week will be more productive because we'll only have to break down 4 college basketball games, the MLB playoffs, and we get the entire NFC bracket, the entire NFC free agency. And I'm sure there's going to be some AFC moves next week, especially if like DeAndre Hopkins goes to an AFC team or Lamar Jackson gets traded. That'll take precedent over the NFC, unfortunately. I don't think it'll happen, but the NFL might be sick of college basketball getting all this attention, so they may try to shake things up this week because most of the free agency moves happen in the first week, but some of the bigger moves, they don't necessarily happen right away. And pro days are going to begin next week too. I mean, Richardson's pro day is in 2 weeks, but Levis, Stroud, and Bryce Young's pro days are all next week, Joey. So we could talk about that too for next Saturday. I mean, think about it. We could pretty much break that down. I mean, I can't say Bryce Young won't be number 1, but my gut's telling me it's going to be Stroud or Young if Carolina stays at 1. But any final thoughts before we wrap this up? Because we are going to wrap this up in 3 minutes.
No,
we got our talking points for next week
think
already.
we covered about everything.
Go ahead.
I think we covered about everything.
Yeah. We covered about everything. We overdid it slightly, but not to the point where we saturated the podcast. And I think that's actually good for once because we kept it simple, but we overdid it a little, but we didn't overdo it to an extreme and have like a 5-hour podcast. And that was the goal, I think, for both of us. So I'm going to sign off and resume some college basketball. There are some games on CBS. There's a triple header on CBS. I would recommend you check those games out, Joey, and enjoy the rest of your Saturday. We'll see you guys next week at the Utopia of Sports. Thank you guys for listening to live stream on YouTube. For more YouTube content,